Fallacy. Next Generation, Academy of Ancients, Book 7. Written by Avery Cross. Narrated by Jack Ainsworth. Chapter 1. Nyala. Jack pushed me ahead of him, keeping himself between me and whatever monstrous beast was chasing us. Flashes of the battles I'd fought against cultists and undead kept hitting me at random. A dead tree would become a shambling zombie. A ragged bush was a cultist, ready to try to end my life. I flinched away, cursing at the dangling branches striking me in the face and shoulders. I couldn't think about the past. That wasn't now. Those weren't the monsters chasing us. I had no idea what was after us, but the fear burning in Jack's eyes was enough to keep me moving and let me know we didn't want to be caught by whatever was coming after us. We hadn't stopped running since we came through the mirror. My sides ached, and my lungs were on fire. My legs kept threatening to buckle, but we had to keep moving, keep running. I'd tried to pull on my magic, but the air was too dry here. Wherever here was, I wasn't able to do anything except run. Jack cursed, then started coughing. He stumbled, and I whirled around to grab hold of his arm. The howling roar came again. My skin prickled down my back. I dragged Jack with me, ignoring his protests to simply drop him and get myself out of there. "Will you shut up?" I snapped. "I'm not leaving you." "You should," he rasped. "Nyala." "It's not happening, so save your breath. You sound like you need it."
"Ouch,"
he said, choking out a ragged laugh through his hacking.
"That was a low blow."
The thundering steps that had been behind us became more distant. Was the beast giving up? I wanted to look over my shoulder, but fought the urge. The landscape had hardly changed, even after how far we'd run. All around were decaying and dead trees jutting out of the cracked, dry earth. Their empty branches creaked and groaned as if they were alive. For all I knew, they could be. The ground was littered with hunks of bark and brittle sticks that crunched under our shoes. Beneath our feet was hard-packed dirt, scattered with obsidian stones. The sky overhead had an eerie reddish hue that was really starting to mess with my eyes. The clouds swirled and twisted around like a storm was constantly brewing. Blood-red flashes of lightning constantly streaked through the thunderheads. Yes, this was a great place we'd found ourselves in.
"There,"
Jack said, nudging me.
"We can duck in there for a bit."
Off to our right, through the trees, were 4 massive boulders scrunched together. Between them was a crevice that looked barely big enough for us to squeeze into. Some dead branches were lying on the ground around it. "You think that'll work?" I asked.
"Worth a shot."
I was going to suggest we go a little further, then I glimpsed Jack's pale face. Blood dotted his lips and covered his chin. His feet were dragging, and most of his weight was leaning on me, though he kept pushing himself upright, like he was trying not to be such a burden. I shifted our course and aimed for the crevice. The howling was still behind us, but I could barely hear it now, over the trees and the rumbling thunder. Once we reached the opening, I ignored Jack's protests and shoved him inside first. Then I gathered up the branches into a pile and pulled the whole mess right up to the entrance, blocking us from sight the best I could. In the semi-darkness of our makeshift sanctuary, I sank onto the ground across from Jack. He was doing his best to muffle his coughing against his arm. Each sharp intake of breath was another stabbing pain in my own chest. I found his hand and held it tight until the fit passed. He slumped against the boulder, his body shaking and his hand squeezing mine. I leaned forward, using the edge of my sleeve to wipe the blood off his face.
"Stop,"
he murmured.
"Just stop."
He tried to let go of my hand, but I held on.
"Nyala."
"You're an idiot, you know that?"
"Is that all you want to call me right now?"
"No, there's a massive list of what I want to call you and yell at you for, Jack Scott. But I'm not, because it won't do either of us any good right now." I dabbed at his face until the last of the blood was gone. The faintest flicker of fire danced in his eyes, while he stared at me as if I was the one who'd gone crazy. Since we'd finally stopped moving, the events that landed us here hit me all over again. How I'd found Jack in the attic of Briar's home. How that mirror had come to life. How Jack had yelled at me to leave him. Then we'd both been sucked in and wound up in this horrible place. Everything I'd found out from Nick and Luke came back to me too, including who Jack's parents were and the fact that they'd been murdered. Questions rambled about in my mind, all the ones that had sprouted about why Jack had come to Academy of Ancients in the first place, and what he was looking for. Yeah, there were a lot of things I wanted to yell at him for. But right then, I was just glad he wasn't dead. "What were you thinking?" I blurted. My voice was rough from sucking in such dry air for so long. I was beyond parched. How long could we last here without water?
"You have every right to be pissed at me,"
he whispered. He seemed unwilling to meet my gaze and focused on a tiny pebble near his boots instead.
"I lied to you and broke into your friend's house. I'm sure you think I used you, but I swear that's not true."
"You think that's why I'm mad?" He blinked at me.
"It's not."
"I know you didn't use me," I assured him. No matter how we'd wound up at the Morris estate, I trusted my gut when it came to Jack, and I believed Zach's words. Sometimes coincidence was just that. Unless Jack was damn good at hiding some villainous side of him, I was going to keep trusting my gut. "I'm mad that you didn't just tell me the truth, that you didn't trust me." I looked at our clasped hands. "I told you so much. Did you really think I wouldn't want to know about you? About your life and what you're going through?" He shrugged, and a confused smile graced his face.
"I didn't want to put any more on your shoulders. How could I, after everything you've been through?"
He started to speak again, then stopped. "What?"
"What do you think you know about me?"
Oh, right, I hadn't had the chance to talk to him since Nick and Luke had shown up in Silent Heights to tell me what they dug up on Jack. "A few things," I replied softly. "I have connections." His laugh wasn't what I'd expected to hear right then, and I glanced up. He was grinning, and the fire in his eyes had brightened.
"Is that right?"
"Yeah, it is. Look, it wasn't my idea to look into you, but Bri was worried, and Zach and his brothers wanted to know who you were for my sake. And they did some digging, especially after they caught you breaking into the artifact buildings. And I'm sorry about your family," I ended with a cringe. "I'm really sorry." Jack nodded, but he didn't look away from me.
"You have nothing to be sorry for. You didn't kill them. You didn't ruin my life."
"No, but there's obviously some shit going on, and you need help, right? That's why you were at the estate? Why you were poking around at Academy? What are you looking for? A way to find your brother?" Jack's eyes blazed with anger, and his skin burned. Flames appeared at his fingertips, until he breathed in deeply, controlling his temper.
"It's a long story, and one I don't want to get into. Not here."
I considered pushing, but he was right. Answers could wait. "You will tell me," I said firmly. "Everything, Jack. No more secrets." His nod was all I got in return. I let it go. For now. "Do you know where we are, or what that mirror was?" I asked.
"A cursed item, created 200 years ago,"
he said, peering through the haphazardly put-together wall of dead branches.
"The Mirror of Jellin."
"What?" I exclaimed. "No, that's supposed to be a myth."
"It's real. I came across it a few years ago, actually. It was in the hands of a not-so-great commander, and for some reason it was hidden at the Morris estate. I wonder if the late general confiscated it. I doubt he even knew what it was."
He rubbed the back of his neck sheepishly.
"I think I accidentally activated it when my blood made it onto the glass."
He hung his head.
"This is my fault. I'm so sorry. You wouldn't be here if it wasn't for me."
"You told me to run, remember?"
"Why didn't you?"
I shrugged. "I'm stubborn." His lips started to lift into a smile, but a distant howl stopped it from manifesting.
"We're in a wasteland of sorts, populated by monstrous creatures and a sky that never clears. It's a dead world, created as a punishment for Jellin's allies after he believed they betrayed him."
"He was a fire summoner, right?"
"So the legend goes. I don't remember all of it, but I do remember the mirror."
"Anything on how to get out of this place before we wind up torn to shreds?" My voice faltered, and Jack gave my hand a comforting squeeze.
"You're not going to die here. I won't let you."
"I'm useless right now."
"No, you're not,"
he stated, and gently reached over to turn my face towards his.
"I'd already be dead if it weren't for you."
I started to argue, but he pressed his lips to mine. I leaned into him, his arms wrapped around me, hugging me close. I squeezed him back until his lips slipped from mine and left a soft touch on my forehead. "Still pissed at you," I warned, and he chuckled.
I would expect nothing less.
He hugged me once more, then pointed through the branches.
The legend states the only way to leave this place is to reach the temple at the exact center.
"How big is this realm or whatever?"
Too big for us to randomly wander and hope to find it, but the temple should be giving off a magical charge, so...
He held up his hand, and a small bird of fire burst to life in his palm.
"We can follow that trail. This will lead us right to it."
The tiny bird fluttered happily in his hand. It was gorgeous to watch. I hadn't known Jack would make something like that. "And all we have to do is not get eaten on the way. Easy."
I do love your optimism.
"Hey, my optimism is what got me through all that shit with undead and cultists," I reminded him, suppressing a shiver of fear. This wasn't that fight. We weren't about to be surrounded and potentially killed by an evil necromancer. I squared my shoulders and looked Jack right in the eye. "We can do this. I can do this." Jack let the bird take flight, then held my hand.
"You're not alone."
He cleared his throat, and I worried he was going to have another fit, but it passed by with little more than a tiny cough.
"Ready?"
I nodded, and we pushed the branches out of the way. The fiery bird flew out of our tiny hiding spot and circled overhead. On its second go-around, it let out a musical cry and set off. Jack and I ran after it, dodging trees and keeping our hands held tightly together. I prayed we'd reach this temple and hopefully our escape before his burst of energy dissipated. The bird darted to the left, then right, cutting a jagged path through the wasteland. Jack muffled a cough, and his hold on my hand lessened. Not about to let him fall behind, I merely adjusted my grip and ensured he stayed right behind me. The trees were thinning out, and my heart lifted that maybe we were getting close. Maybe it was just up. A gray-haired beast, the size of a grizzly bear, slid into my path. I skidded to a stop while it reared back on its muscled hind legs, swiping black claws toward my face. Bat-like ears jutted out from the top of its head. Its snout was longer than a normal bear's and looked more like it was part wolf. Its roar reverberated through me and sent a tendril of icy fear down my spine. Jack yanked me back, pulling me into his chest. Steps thundered in from the left and right, and finally behind us. We were surrounded. The fiery bird fluttered overhead, frantically flapping its tiny wings. At least it wasn't going to take off without us. Not as if we were going anywhere. Jack tried to keep himself between the monsters and me, but there was no safe place for me to stand. Saliva dripped from their gaping maws. The one to our left let out a raspy coughing sound that almost sounded like a laugh.
"When I tell you to, hit the ground and cover your head,"
Jack whispered. "What are you going to do?"
"Just do it."
Bright orange and red flames danced in his eyes. He raised his hands and winked.
"Now."
I hit the ground and covered my head at the same time Jack yelled, and a roaring inferno erupted from his hands. Chapter 2. Jack.
Fire swirled around Nyala and me, forming a wall that the beasts roared and howled at. The flames pushed them back, singeing their matted fur if they tried to charge forward. With my strength quickly draining, I pushed my hands out, spreading the flames. The beasts had to retreat or become trapped within them. One by one, they fled, their retreating steps thundering in my ears. No, wait, that wasn't their footsteps. That was my heart beating way too hard and too fast. I staggered forward a step, then I became lightheaded and I hit the ground. A harsh slap to my face brought me out of the darkness. Nyala's face hovered over me, her brow drawn together and her eyes overflowing with worry. "Was that necessary?" I asked, once my cheek started to sting.
"You're such a dumbass, you know that?"
she muttered, then kissed me. That made up for the slap. I buried my hand in her hair, holding her to me and enjoying the moment a bit longer. Then she disentangled herself from me and sat back.
"We have to move. They might come back."
"How long was I out?" I asked, then grunted at the effort it took to get back on my feet. My vision swam, but Nyala's firm grip on my arm kept me upright.
"A minute, maybe 2.
She smacked my shoulder this time.
Don't scare me like that again.
I wasn't gonna let you get eaten.
You aren't allowed to get yourself killed trying to protect me.
I wanted to argue, but a stabbing pain in my chest doubled me over. The next second, I was coughing and spitting up a few mouthfuls of blood. Nyala never let me fall, though. Once the fit ended, she wiped the blood from my face with her already dirtied sleeve. Then she wrapped her arm around my waist, draped mine over her shoulders, and turned us so we were once again following the bird. I was amazed it was still there after I'd passed out. Then I looked at it and cursed.
What's wrong?
Nyala asked. That took more out of me than I thought. The bird's starting to fail. If it goes out, I'm not sure I'll be able to conjure another one.
Then I suggest we keep moving.
Yes, ma'am.
Don't ma'am me,
she said, but I heard the smile in her voice.
Are you always this reckless?
When it comes to protecting those I care about, yes, I answered honestly. We walked in silence for a little while, the firebird continuing to lead us onward. It had slowed its frantic pace. I wasn't sure if that was so we could keep up, or because my strength was fading that quickly. All the while, I kept an ear out for any hint those monsters were coming back. I doubted they were going to simply leave us be. Every few seconds I glanced at Nyala, wondering about how she was really holding up. I felt her shaking. She kept muttering under her breath, too, as if she was trying to stop herself from losing it entirely. Guilt swarmed me all over again. I did this to her. It was bad enough that she'd figured out part of what I'd hidden from her. But then I'd gone and dragged her into this shithole. She should hate me right now. She should leave me where I was and find her own way out. But she was still by my side, helping me. Nyala was not someone I deserved to have in my life. A cough built up in my chest, and I was helpless to stop it from coming out. Nyala brought us to a stop. I leaned against a dead tree, struggling to get enough air into my lungs to not pass out again. I willed the worst parts of the curse not to attack me now. Hallucinating in this place was not ideal. I didn't need to be confronted with images of a dead Nyala, or seeing my brother's face. Anger at how he'd torn our family apart helped me push the pain aside and let Nyala know I was good to keep walking. She kept her head on a swivel. Her skin temperature fluctuated, becoming frigid, then hot. When she tripped over her feet, I was the one who brought us to a stop to check that she was all right. She had to be messing with her magic somehow to have her temperature waver that much. What are you doing? I asked.
If those beasts come back, you're not going to be able to fight them off alone.
And? She bit her bottom lip, while her forehead scrunched in concentration. The tiniest drops of frost were visible on her hands.
And there's water here. It's just not a lot. I'm doing what I can to collect it and hold on to it.
You're weakening yourself. More water appeared on her skin. At the same time, her eyes fluttered like she was struggling to stay conscious. Nyala, stop.
Oh, like you get to give me orders.
If those things come back, I'm going to hold them off, and you're going to make a run for it. That's the plan.
That's your plan, not mine. We're getting out of here together.
Not if it comes down to one of us making it, I argued.
So you have a death wish, is that it? Just because you're dying doesn't mean you get to sacrifice yourself to save me, she yelled. That's not happening, so shut up while you're ahead. You don't deserve to be left here to die.
You don't know what I've done, I whispered. You don't know what I deserve.
I know you're a thief and not a murderer, she said, glancing up at me.
Not yet, I murmured. I broke away from her and stumbled my way to another tree. Resting my back on it, I bent over, doing what I could to catch my breath. Even that was getting harder. My limbs trembled. Gods, how was I going to make it all the way to the temple? You don't know the real me, I told her, not sure where the words were coming from. Not all of it.
And you're going to tell me once we get out of here. I'm not leaving you behind.
She came toward me and tenderly cupped my face.
Whatever you're dealing with, you're not alone either, Jack. Whether you like it or not, you've got me now. And you're going to get over it and let me help you because I watch out for those I care about too.
Nyala, I whispered, holding my hands over hers, knowing the next words were ones I should have said weeks ago. I'm dying. and I don't know if there's a way to save me. I never should have gotten involved with you. Her kiss cut me off. She held on to me, and I was helpless to hold back the flicker of fire that seeped from my hand to wind about her. When we parted, her eyes were tinged with frost. I remembered what I'd seen in her the last time they'd looked like that. A future, my future, where I'd survived this damn curse.
"We get out of here, then we'll talk about it,"
she said, then kissed me again. She pulled me away from the tree, and we set off once more.
"So, can you tell me about your parents?"
Distraction. That's what she wanted. And right then, I needed it too. I cleared my throat and told her about Jenny and Clark Scott. I talked about how they'd met and the adventures they'd gone on. I told her stories of their craziest digs and the items they'd recovered. I worried talking so much about them would only increase the ache that usually formed in my chest by now. Instead, it was comforting to share so much about them with someone else. It brought them back to life in a way. And all the while I could have sworn I could picture my parents' smiling faces and hearing Dad tell me that Nyala was a keeper. I hoped she was, but there was no telling how she'd react once she knew everything. Would she look at me the same once she realized what my plans were? I was only a thief for now, but soon enough, there'd be blood on my hands. Not even Nyala would be enough to sway my mind from finishing what my brothers started. No one would be. Could Nyala truly love a murderer?
Chapter 3. Nyala. The flaming bird we'd been following was no longer as bright as it had been only moments ago. Soon enough, it was going to puff out of existence. My eyes were strained from flicking between the bird and where it led us, hoping to catch a glimpse of this mysterious damned temple that would supposedly get us back home. A soft cry came from the bird, and it faded even more. Jack's arm over my shoulder became heavier, his legs buckled a second later, and he took us to the ground. The fall dragged a ragged curse from his mouth. He wound up on all fours, sucking in air as if he'd just been pulled from a lake and had nearly drowned. He flattened his hand to his chest, and the coughing started seconds later. I stayed right by his side, keeping him from face-planting onto the harsh ground. It was bad enough that he kept digging his fingers through the dirt and rocks, slicing up his fingers. The fit lasted far longer than the others had. When it finally ended, Jack sagged over. I caught him and moved him so he wound up with his head in my lap. My right hand was coated in a very thin layer of frost. I'd shifted what I had from my left to my right, condensing it all into one location. It was all I'd been able to gather so far. I'd been waiting to use it in case those monsters returned, but with Jack cringing each time he breathed, I hovered my hand over his chest. "No," he rasped, catching my wrist and stopping my hand from descending. "Save it." "You're in pain."
"I've been in pain for a long-ass time,"
he muttered bitterly.
"I'll deal with it."
"Jack." His grip on my wrist tightened, and he shook his head.
"Save it, Nyala, please."
I considered ignoring his request and pressing my hand to his chest anyway. His grip was already growing slack, and he was burning up, but not from his inner fire. When had the fever hit him? Or was it a fever at all? He hadn't said how he was dying. A curse was the only thing that made sense. Until I knew which one, I had no idea what to expect. What else had he been enduring all this time? And all alone? My hand lowered another inch. His hold on my wrist fell away, and his head lolled to the side. "Jack! No! Stay with me! Jack!" I gave his cheeks a hard tap, and he flinched. His eyes opened. 2 of the tiniest flames burned within them. I sighed in relief, then bent over and kissed his forehead.
"Sorry, more tired than I thought I was."
A quick look overhead showed me the bird was still there, but she was little more than a fiery outline against the blood-colored sky. "It's fine. We've been walking for ages."
"Actually, we haven't,"
he corrected with a chuckle that turned into a cough. I braced for another fit, but one didn't come.
"This place messes with your head. We've probably only been here less than an hour."
"What? That's not possible."
"It is. Why this place sucks."
He spat.
"We have to keep moving."
He tried to get up, but his body gave out, and he fell back onto my lap with a groan.
Damn it.
Just give yourself another minute. We're fine, I think. After Jack had burned the monsters, we hadn't heard any more distant howls or roars. I told myself it was a good sign and that they'd leave us alone from now on. That was what the optimist in me tried to hold on to. The darker part of me said they were waiting for us to let our guard down. Then they'd attack. Could I survive another fight? Then, against the undead and the cultists, I'd been able to use my magic. Here there was so little water that I was close to being human. How the hell was I supposed to hold off those beasts if they showed up?
Tell me,
Jack whispered, fumbling for my hand.
Tell me about what you want to do after Academy of Ancients.
I don't think now's the time.
Please, I want to hear it.
How could I say no after everything he told me about his parents? I knew why he'd done it too. Hearing him talk had kept me from overthinking where we were and our chances of making it home. I willed the monsters to stay far, far away and focus only on our task of getting home. This wasn't like the last time. There was no army of undead. There wasn't some big bad necromancer out there trying to take over the world and kill everyone. We just had to keep moving. Follow the bird and keep moving. Make you a deal, I told him, forcing a smile to my face while I looked down at him. You get back on your feet, and I'll tell you everything you want to know. It took some effort, but Jack never once complained. He got mobile once more, and we continued through the winding forest of dead trees. I started talking first about what I wanted to do once I finished grad school, how I'd always wanted to do what his parents did in a sense, be out in the field, go on digs. But then another part of me could never learn enough or read enough. I was torn between wanting to get my hands dirty or being tucked away in some lab somewhere.
You do seem to have an adventurous spirit,
Jack mumbled, his words slurring. His eyes kept closing too. You know me, I said, tightening my grip on his waist. Nyala the Bold. Can't wait to get out there and see what the world has to offer. I mean, hell, thanks to you, I can at least use my magic again. That's a bonus.
That's thanks to you.
I laughed, doing what I could to keep the panic from my voice. Overhead, the bird was barely visible. We were running out of time. Jack was running out of time. I was a mess until you showed up. I probably still would be, I rambled. I would have ended up hiding in my room, waiting for those evil bastards to show back up. You know, I thought about not coming back. To Academy, I mean. What was the point when I couldn't even use my magic? Then there you were, and you reminded me what it was not to be afraid all the time. You did that for me, Jack. There was no response, and his body leaned heavily into my side. Jack? Hey, stay awake! His feet were still moving, but all I received in reply were mumbled words that made no sense. I thought I heard him say chance and someone else's name. The bird swooped down low in front of us and hovered before Jack's face. It gave one last soft cry, then it sank into his chest and vanished. This was bad. This was beyond bad. How are we supposed to find the temple now? A howl echoed across the wasteland. A second followed, then a third. I told myself not to turn around. I told myself to keep walking, but which way? I bit my cheek, willing my fear not to show. Jack shifted beside me, then his hand was reaching for mine that was clasped around his side. I wasn't sure what he was doing, and he didn't respond when I said his name. A tiny flicker of heat burned between us. It was like a living flame that had been shot into my veins. The frost covering my right hand gave off an ethereal blue glow. While I watched, the blue was joined with a faint orange, as if embers burned beneath my skin. The patterns shifted and changed on the back of my hand until they formed a small songbird. It lifted off my skin, breaking free with a tiny shake, sending ice crystals falling over us. It swooped playfully in front of my face, fluttered its tiny frost-tipped wings, and set off straight ahead through the trees. How? I breathed. Jack's hand fell away from mine, and I decided the how didn't matter. With the beasts howling in the distance, I moved as quickly as I could, pulling him with me. The bird left a trail of ice in its wake, and I resorbed each tiny drop. The ground sloped downward and turned far rockier than it had been so far. Tree roots protruded from the ground. Maneuvering Jack around them was a challenge.
My foot caught on a gnarled mess of them, and we wound up sliding down the hill, landing a few feet apart, but for the most part unharmed. At the bottom, his eyes opened, and he gave his head a shake, but he wasn't looking at me. "Jack?" He pointed behind me. I turned, terrified I was going to come face to face with one of the monstrosities this place had sent after us. Instead, I had to bite back a yell of excitement. There, sitting in what was essentially a crater, was a gray stone temple, or what remained of one. 3 of 4 walls were nothing but piles of rubble. The one left standing was covered in blackened brambles and vines that looked as if they'd been scorched. The ground around it was also scarred and charred. Had a fire broken out here? Destroyed the place? I searched for any sign of a mirror, assuming that's how we'd get home, but there wasn't one. Jack grunted, using a boulder to haul himself off the ground. Behind us, rocks skittered down the hillside. A triumphant howl split through the air. "Go!" Jack yelled, pushing me forward. "Nyala, go!" I took hold of his hand and pulled him right along with me. The small frostbird was darting to and fro over something on the temple floor. We were only 30 yards away, then 20, so close to getting... A bolt of red lightning struck the ground, throwing Jack and me off our feet and away from safety. The hit separated us. At least now I knew why the ground was so blackened. The strike of lightning dazed me, and I shook my head, working to clear my blurry vision. "Jack!" I yelled, then immediately started hacking. The explosion of lightning had stirred up a dust cloud that filled my mouth and clogged my nose. I coughed, working to clear my lungs. The ground trembled, and a growl I'd hoped never to hear again sounded right behind me. On my knees, I turned around, and terror froze me in place. One of the massive beasts was within reach. It opened its jaws wide and let out a roar I could have sworn made my ears bleed. 2 rows of sharp fangs stained with blood set my pulse to racing. Was that going to be my blood soon enough? Then it raised its paws, those shining claws ready to slice right through me. I attempted to pull on my magic, but the flimsy shield of ice shattered without enough water to hold it together. The beast's paw continued its move toward impaling me. I scrambled to get back, knowing it wasn't going to be in time. A burst of fire cocooned me. A figure darted in between the beast and me. Jack's pained grunt stilled my racing heart. The fire faded, and I was left standing in a damn nightmare. 3 claws protruded from Jack's right shoulder. Blood oozed from the wounds, dripping onto the ground in a steady stream. His lips twitched, and the idiot had the nerve to wink at me. Then the beast yanked its paw back, and Jack crumpled. Chapter 4. Jack. While I lay on the ground, all I could think of is how the pain in my shoulder outweighed the pain that usually engulfed my lungs. I'd take it if it meant saving Nyala. I hadn't thought I'd get to her in time. She was saying my name, and that damned beast was still behind me. I pushed myself upright and rolled over. I wasn't about to be taken down with my back turned. That wasn't the Scott way of going out. I tried to get my mouth to work, needing Nyala to get out of here, but the blood loss and the curse were taking their toll. Keeping my eyes open was a near impossibility. Hands grabbed me under my armpits and dragged me over the rocky ground. Very cold hands. The beast followed one measured step at a time. Its gleaming black eyes held a promise of death in them. How much longer did we have till the rest of them showed up? Behind me, the high melodic tone of birdsong cried out. A tiny bird made of frost swooped low around my face, then away again, singing the same frantic tune. It did a second time, then a third. What was it doing? I still had no idea how Nyala had even made the bird in the first place. "Almost there," Nyala whispered. "We're almost there, just a bit further." Almost where? I tried to look back. I even tried to get to my feet, but the last of the strength I'd held onto was gone. We were over the ledge of stones now that had once formed the temple floor. Nyala's hands steadily became warmer, and the next time the bird passed in front of my face, it was far larger than it had been. Nyala's grip became almost painful. Then I was on my feet. She kept me at her side. Her gaze was focused on the beast. Mine was on her. She was glaring straight ahead. There was no fear there, not even a flicker. She pulled us back another step, and the frost bird surrounded us once again. This time I spotted the stream of frost leaving Nyala's hands and going into the bird. It expanded in size once more until it was nearly half the size of the beast. "What are you doing?" I whispered. Nyala's lip twitched.
"I have no idea."
Her eyes darted over her shoulder.
"Do you trust me?"
A weak nod was all I could do at that point. The beast snarled. Its claws dragged over the stone steps. Rocks skittered and fell all around us. The rest of its pack had finally arrived. The beast tensed, every rippling muscle beneath its fur readying to strike. The moment it did, the frostbird exploded with an ear-piercing cry that sent ice shards shooting into the beast. It roared, and Nyala fell backward, taking me with her. I waited to hit hard stone. All we met was air and darkness. Nyala's arm around my waist held on like an iron band. The fall only lasted seconds. Then we hit something solid with an ear-splitting thud. "Shit!" a voice yelled. "Luke, Adam, get up here!" Nyala groaned from beside me. My eyes took a second to focus. When they did, the familiar sight of a dusty attic packed with crates and boxes came into view. And behind us, its frame giving off a faint glow, was the mirror of Jellin. We were back in the mansion. We'd made it back. I lay on my back, relief washing over me. Too bad it wasn't enough to take away the throbbing from the wounds at my shoulder, or the burning in my lungs.
"Nyala, are you all right? What happened?"
The same voice that had yelled asked.
"A lot."
Nyala's face appeared above mine, her eyes wide with worry.
"Jack, can you hear me? Hey, stay with me, all right? Jack?"
Her fingers dug into my arms. I tried to tell her I was going to be fine, but my vision darkened. Her panic yell faded into the background, and I was floating through nothingness.
"Won't the bleeding stop? I don't understand what's happening to him."
"Nyala?" I attempted to rouse myself, but all I could do was lay there. Where was there? The floor beneath me was now a bed. A cool hand held mine in a death grip. Someone else was prodding at my shoulder. I flinched, wanting to get away from the discomfort. "It's slowing." A different male voice from earlier said, "It is, Nyala. You just have to be patient. This wound is severe. He's lucky to still be breathing."
"I don't even know how we made it out of there," she whispered.
"But you did, and that's what matters. We'll get him stable, and then we can talk. Take a breath. I don't need you passing out either." Something wet and slimy was placed on my shoulder. It stung, and I grunted, shifting to get out from underneath whatever the hell it was they'd put on me. Firm hands held me in place, telling me to take it easy. I didn't know these people. Were we still at the Morris estate? Was Nyala safe? What was going to happen to her? Snippets of memories assaulted me. I remembered the faces of the two men who charged into the attic right before we'd gone through the mirror. Talons. They were Talons, and they were here. Could they be trusted? What if they were like General Erickson? What if they worked for her? Nyala. I had to protect Nyala. Fire sparked at my hands. I forced my eyes open, willing my body to get up and move.
"Jack, calm down,"
Nyala said, her voice shaky. Her face came into view while she held mine firmly between the soothing coolness of her palms. She looked unharmed as far as I could tell. She was still wearing the clothes she'd had on when we went through the mirror. They were covered in dried blood. My fire flared at the sight of it. She followed my gaze down, then sighed.
"It's not mine,"
she assured me.
"Jack, look at me."
I forced my eyes up to meet hers. "Safe?" I rasped.
"We are,"
she said, her thumbs brushing over my cheeks, sending more streams of cooling frost over my skin.
"We're safe. You need to let Adam take care of your wounds, all right?"
Fear glittered in her eyes, and tears shone under the soft yellow light of the lamps behind her.
"Trust me, please?"
"Always," I whispered. I wanted so badly to kiss her right then, but the agony of my shoulder was replaced by stabbing pain in my lungs. The coughing hit me then, and I fell back to the bed, hacking and struggling to breathe. Nyala placed her hands on my chest, easing some of the discomfort. I settled down, doing what I could to stay coherent. The man I assumed was Adam stepped up to the side of the bed again. He had a kind enough smile, but there was a ghost in his eyes. He'd survived his own kind of hell. I wondered what it was, but then he was working on my shoulder again. Nyala talked to me until I was too exhausted to keep my eyes open any longer. She was rambling on about some artifact or other at Academy that she was planning on researching. Her voice lulled me to sleep, and I passed out again. A chilled touch on my forehead pulled me from the dream I'd been having. Nyala had been there. We'd been in the gardens at Academy, laughing and holding each other close. It had been peaceful. I wanted to go back to that moment until the touch moved down my cheek to my jaw, then came to rest on my shoulder.
Adam said he is going to be okay.
That voice was new, a woman.
You're telling me if it was Zach lying on this bed right now, you wouldn't be freaking out?
Nyala muttered, then sighed.
Sorry.
Shut up, the other woman scolded. You have every right to be losing at a bet.
It was too close, Nyala whispered. Too damn close.
She squeezed my hand, and though I wanted to do it back, my muscles refused to respond.
I still don't even know how I did what I did in that place, Bri. It was crazy.
Bri? As in Briar Morris? She was here? Shit, how pissed was she going to be at me for breaking into her family's estate?
How about you stop underestimating yourself?
Briar commented. I silently agreed with her.
You made it home. That's what's important. And as much as I'd like to have a word with your new boyfriend here about several things, I suppose I should thank him. Who knows how long it would have taken Zach and me to find that damn attic. Zach's been up here for the last 2 hours with Luke and Nick, trying to sort out what else Dad had tucked away. What did they do with the mirror?
Nyala asked the same question that was on my mind.
Zach trapped it in a spirit cage. It won't be dragging anyone else into it anytime soon. Adam's setting up storage for everything else at Talon HQ. They'll be by in a few days to get everything.
They were going to take everything out of the house? Shit, had they found the dagger? If they took it to their damned HQ, I'd never get my hands on it. I had to stop them from taking what might be my only chance to break this curse. It took way too much effort, but I got my eyes opened. I was in the same room as before. The overhead light was off, and sunlight was streaming in through 2 sets of double windows. The bed I was on was a 4-poster, made of some dark wood or other. I didn't much care about those details and worked at pushing myself upright.
Jack?
Nyala was immediately there, helping me so my back was propped up against the pillows.
Take it easy. There's no rush to get moving.
The attic, I said, glancing from Nyala to the woman beside her with dark brown eyes. They filled with fire while they watched me. Definitely Briar Morris. What else was in the attic?
Plenty, Briar replied. Not that I'm going to tell you.
All I care about is a dagger. Was there a dagger?
Is that why you broke into my house?
Briar asked, and fire flickered around her fingertips.
Why you dragged my friend into whatever dangerous shit you have going on? You were looking to steal something.
Nyala stepped between Briar and me.
Please don't set his feet on fire while he's still lying on a bed, healing from a wound he got, saving my life, she said firmly.
Briar rolled her eyes but held up her hands. Her fire disappeared, though she continued to glare at me.
Answers, now. Why did you come here?
I hesitated only until Nyala looked at me again.
You said you'd tell me the truth, she whispered. All of it, no matter how horrible it is. What are you looking for? Why go through all this trouble to find what, a dagger? Why do you need it?
It's a long story, I warned her, and you might not like me by the end of it.
How about you let me decide that for myself? She asked. Why were you after a dagger?
I stared at her clasped hands. Hers became covered in breathtaking frost patterns that soon covered my hand, too. Dark red embers seeped out of my skin, igniting the frost as it had done so many times before. There was a lot we needed to talk about, more than just my past and how the hell that had become my life brought me to Nyala. And how our power seemed so connected. It was insane. I'd only ever seen this happen with 2 other people. And that, well, That was just insane to think it was happening to Nyala and me for the same reason it had happened to them. The ache in my chest returned with a vengeance, brought on by grief I couldn't let go of. Nyala's frost eased up my arm and spread across my chest without me even having to ask. The cold soothed the ache and stopped the fit from hitting me as hard as it usually did. Or at least I thought it hadn't been as bad. Nyala's brow furrowed, and she gently dabbed at my chin, staining the sleeve of her shirt with more of my blood.
Jack?
I cleared my throat, and unable to look her in the eye, I stared at our hands. I wasn't lying when I said I was dying. I've been cursed, and if I can't find the dagger of vitality, I'm going to die. And it's not going to be a pleasant death.
Chapter 5. Nyala. Jack insisted on not sitting in bed while he told me and everyone else at the house his story. Zach and his 3 brothers were here as well as Briar. The last 24 hours had been filled with non-stop worry over Jack's wounds. Now, while I waited for him to get up the nerve to start talking, all I kept hearing inside my head were his words about being cursed and dying. Jack was dying. I hated that I'd been right. I hated that we had to talk about this at all. Steam rose from the mug of chamomile tea in front of me. I hadn't been able to drink any of it, though. How long did Jack have until the curse killed him? Which coughing fit would wind up being the end of him?
Nyala?
Glancing up, I looked at Jack to my right. We sat with the others at the kitchen table, waiting for Adam and Luke to finish scouring the attic before they joined us. Jack nodded to the table in front of me. Frost had spread from beneath my flattened palms to surround my mug. It crept up the sides of the ceramic and was quickly making its way across the round table. I grimaced. Shit, sorry.
I think you have every right not to be in control right now, Jack murmured. It's my fault.
No, it's not, I argued, and he arched his brow. I'll be fine, really. His face was blank, but his eyes flared with his inner fire. He pressed his fingertips to the table, and the frost burned away. He started to tug his hands back on his lap, but I reached for them instead, needing to touch him and feel that warmth, needing to know he was still alive. Across from me, Briar's eyes narrowed until Zach whispered something in her ear. She rolled her eyes but stopped looking at Jack like she was contemplating jumping inside his head to torment him. Footsteps came from the kitchen doorway, then Luke and Adam were there.
Right. Everything's as safe as we can make it until the team comes to collect it all in the morning,
Adam announced. He sat at the table between Luke and Nick. His smile was friendly enough, but behind it, I knew he was ready to go on the offensive if push came to shove. That was how the Pierce brothers were.
And I'm afraid there was no dagger in General Morris's collection.
Damn it! Jack tugged his hands free of mine and dragged his fingers through his hair. He shifted his gaze to Briar and Zach.
I'm sorry. I never should have come here.
Yeah, well, if you hadn't, all that shit would still be sitting up there. I had no idea that attic existed, or what was in it, Briar said with a wry smile. That being said, I believe it's time you tell us the truth about who you are, Jack Scott. All of it. His nod was cut off by a cough. I braced, waiting for it to turn into a fit. After a couple of seconds it passed, and he was able to keep breathing all right.
The truth. It's not a short story. Where do you want me to start?
Wherever you need to, I suggested. He hunched over the table and gripped his own mug of tea between his hands.
My parents, Clark and Jenny, were archaeologists and historians. That's how they got started, at least. Over the years, they morphed into, well, I guess the easiest way to describe them would be to call them retrieval specialists. I'm sure some of you know how lucrative the black market is for magical relics and artifacts.
Adam, Luke, and Nick nodded.
We've never had much success with shutting it down,
Adam said with an aggravated huff.
My parents knew how dangerous many of the items were that were constantly being uncovered. They spent nearly every day protecting what they could, ensuring the items were returned to families or taken to museums. They cared about preserving locations, too, ensuring the history of the magic wasn't forgotten. They were damn good at their job,
Jack said, his tone colored with sadness.
Too good.
The tea in his mug began to boil. He shoved it away from him and clasped his hands on the table in front of him.
My younger brother Chance and I spent our early years traveling from one dig site to the next, he went on. My parents taught us everything there was to learn about our magical history, artifacts, and locations, and how important it was to preserve and protect what we rediscovered. When we were old enough, we started helping our parents with certain tasks. You stole from those who tried to sell magic artifacts on the black market,
Nick said.
Jack smirked. My mom always had a knack for sneaking and thieving. She taught me everything I know about how to break wards and get past security systems, technological and magical. She taught Chance, too. Neither of them forced us to help them, though. They constantly told us to take the path we wanted in life. But what my parents did was incredible and dangerous. The thought of not being there to help them was never an option for me, or Chance. At least I didn't think it was.
So you were a family of honorable thieves? I asked.
Essentially, he said with a laugh. We stole from those seeking to make a profit. And from those who already abuse what power they have,
Luke chimed in.
We've heard about some of the thefts you've pulled off.
Jack's eyes hardened, and flames flickered along his fingertips.
We only ever stole from the corrupt. We believe you,
Adam assured Jack.
Past members of the Talons had crossed paths with your parents a time or two. They tried to recruit them, but the Scots were very adamant about not having any direct ties to the military or the government.
It was safer that way,
Jack said.
That's what they thought. Safer for us to be on the outside and not wind up under someone's thumb. Not to be used for their greed.
He leaned back in his chair, swallowing hard, as if he was struggling to find the right words to keep talking.
There's a big player in the black market game, Gabriel Quinton. Air summoner. He's a piece of shit that's got plenty of blood on his hands. My parents believed if we could shut down his enterprise, we'd be able to dismantle more than one big fish. So, after talking it over, we all made the decision that Chance and I would find a way into his operation, get close to him, figure out his plans, and find the best way to stop him for good. We'd been good at covering our tracks and keeping our faces hidden. There were very few people who knew who Chance and I were, so it made sense for us to infiltrate his goons instead of my parents.
The tiny flame spread to his elbows, and he pushed away from the table to pace around the kitchen. That wasn't sadness burning in his eyes now, but fury. The temperature rose in the kitchen. He cursed under his breath. On the next deep inhale he took, the coughing started. I was on my feet and at his side in an instant, stopping him from falling over. He clung to my arm while I guided him back to his seat. Briar brought us some paper towels, and Jack shoved them against his mouth. Red stained the towels, and my gut twisted, knowing he had to be in pain. I pressed my frost-covered hand to his chest while the coughing continued. Eventually the fit ended. Jack sat back, trembling with sweat dotting his brow. He wiped the blood from his lips, then glared at the paper towels in his clenched fist. "Jack, what happened with you and your brother?" I asked softly. "What happened with Gabriel?"
For 2 years, Chance and I worked our way into Gabriel's good graces,
Jack whispered, the words forced as if this was the last story he wanted to be telling me.
We got close to him. We dealt with the worst of the worst in the business. I did things.
He cut himself off and tried to get away from me, but I held onto his arm.
Nyala.
No, whatever you did, it's in the past. And you were doing what you had to do to go after someone much worse. I said, I'm not going to run away from you no matter what you tell me. I added softly.
I never killed anyone,
Jack assured me, but he wouldn't look me in the eye.
A few times it came close. And by the end of that 2 years, I hated myself. Hated that we'd ever thought this was a good idea. But we were so close to getting Gabriel where we wanted him. So damn close to figuring out the players he was involved with. But Chan started acting strange. He wasn't talking to me. We were fighting all the time. I tried to get him to walk away, but he refused. Then I didn't see him for weeks.
Holding out his right palm, he glared at it. Worried about what was going through his head right then, I took that hand and didn't let go. Did you see him again?
No,
Jack snapped, and his hand warmed in mine.
He was too much of a coward to show his face the night he betrayed us, the night he stabbed us in the back. He told Gabriel where my family lived,
told him how to get through the warding and the spells cast to protect our home. He told him everything about us. Gabriel showed up with his bastards and he killed them. My parents bled out right on the living room rug of their own home.
My heart went out to him. I couldn't imagine witnessing my parents' deaths. Why wasn't he brought in? I asked, almost unable to get the words out. You told the authorities what happened.
Gabriel is protected. We never found out by who, but high up enough that nothing I said made a difference.
Jack spat.
What about the curse?
Zach asked.
Gabriel left me with that the same night.
Jack explained. Does this curse have a name? Briar asked. Or the item that gave it to you? Jack nodded and looked right at me.
The coin of creeping death.
My stomach dropped, and I was damn glad I hadn't drunk any of the tea Briar had given me. That's what you've been dealing with?
It's why I didn't want to tell you.
You idiot! I shot out of my chair and glowered at Jack. Why didn't you say anything? Do you have any idea how horrible that curse is?
I've been living with it for this long,
he said with a damn smile I wanted to smack right off his face.
I think I know.
How are you smiling right now? I demanded furiously. What am I missing? Briar asked. You know what this curse is? I crossed my arms, not wanting to voice aloud what Jack was going through. He sighed and turned to Briar, reciting the symptoms for her. With each one, it was like another stab to the chest, and another, and another. How hadn't I put the pieces together? Though I supposed I hadn't thought of that coin because I'd believed it had been lost. No one had seen it in over a century. Apparently, it had been tucked away safe and sound in the Scots vault until Gabriel got his hands on it and gave it to Jack.
And the only thing that can break it is this dagger of vitality?
Zach asked after Jack had fallen silent.
As far as I know, yes.
Jack told him.
I've spent the last 1.5 years or so searching for another way. Nothing's worked. And unless I break it, the pain, the fits, the hallucinations, all of it will continue to worsen until
you die, I finished for him. He hung his head, then stood up.
I'm sorry. I never meant to get involved with anyone in Academy. I only came to find the dagger, and if it wasn't there, I was going to move on. But I met you, and my plan went to shit.
He reached for me, but his hand fell before it touched my arm.
You've been through so much already. All of you have. I'm not about to bring my mess into your lives any more than I have. Now that I know the dagger's not here, I'll move on.
You're just going to leave? I snapped. What is wrong with you?
I'm doing this for you, he argued. Do you have any idea how dangerous I am to be around right now? Worse, the fact that I'm actively dying?
And? He looked at me like I'd gone crazy.
And what? Nyala, I'm not going to ruin your life any more than I already have.
Who said you ruined it? Do you hear me saying that? Because I'm not.
If Gabriel catches wind that I'm trying to find this dagger, that I'm still alive at this point, he's going to come after me. I won't have you putting your life in danger for me. I won't do it. Too many people I care about have already died.
He shook his head and backed even further away from me.
I won't be the reason you go through another hell.
And I'm not going to let you walk away to face this curse alone. It's not happening. I don't care what you say. You and I have something going on between us, I said, not caring that we weren't alone in the kitchen. It's exciting and terrifying and amazing. You're really going to stand there and tell me you want to pretend we don't?
This is my mess to clean up.
Why'd you have to do it alone, huh? Tell me that.
It's my fault,
he yelled, and I blinked, confused. He ran his hand down his face, muttering curses under his breath.
I should have paid closer attention to how that world, how being around so much violence was affecting Chance. And I didn't. I failed him. I let him be corrupted and taken in by those villains.
The choices he made aren't on you.
How are they not? He was my kid brother. I was supposed to protect him. I was supposed to be there for my family. Now my parents are dead and my brother is a traitor.
He stormed toward the kitchen door, but I beat him to it, blocking his path.
Nyala, please. Just let me leave, all right?
I'll let you go, but I'm going with you to find this dagger.
The hell you are.
Then stay and let me help you. Let us help you, I said, resting my hands on his chest. You don't have to do this alone anymore. Jack frowned, then glanced over his shoulder. The Pierce brothers were nodding in agreement with my words. Even Briar had a wicked gleam in her eyes that I knew meant she was entirely on board.
Why?
Jack asked.
Why help me?
Because despite how terrible of a person you think you are, I told him, and he turned back to me, you're not. A terrible person wouldn't have stood up for me and helped me through my trauma. You helped me use my magic again. You jumped in front of a literal monster to protect me. Tears burned in my eyes, and I shifted my hand to his wounded shoulder. You've given so much of yourself to protect the magical artifacts of our kind. Now it's your turn to be protected. Let me do that, please. I sensed his hesitation, but finally he nodded. I hugged him, and he returned the embrace. Frost covered my hands and spread to him, while his fire slipped from his palms and wrapped around us. We were going to save him. No matter what it took, I was not going to let Jack die.
Chapter 6. Jack. A storm had moved in. Lightning shot across the sky. The thunder that followed shook the mansion. I was alone in the kitchen, watching the storm through the back door. After spilling the truth about why I'd come to Academy and about the curse, I'd finally convinced Nyala to take some time for herself. She'd still been covered in my blood and hadn't rested at all since we'd come back through the mirror. Having a few minutes alone gave me time to contemplate how I'd wound up where I was. I'd expected to be tossed out of the mansion at the very least. Worst, I'd assumed Adam Pierce would have me arrested and taken to their HQ. Instead, the Pierce family and Briar Morris were helping me. I wasn't alone anymore. Can you really trust them? They're still part of the military. Who knows if they have any connection to General Erickson? You could be royally screwing yourself over. I sighed, resting my forehead on the glass door. What choice did I have but to trust them? I trusted Nyala without question, but the others? I didn't know them. I'd had far too many people screw me over in the past. Putting my fate in the hands of strangers was terrifying. I had to keep fighting the urge to take off out the front door and ask Nyala to forgive me later. That, and I hated how much I loved that she was going to be staying by my side. We'd made it out of the wasteland, but what if Gabriel did come after me? Or Erickson? This curse was going to weaken me. What if I wasn't enough to protect her? Could I handle failing her as I'd failed Chance or my parents? Lightning lit up the sky, the flash momentarily blinding me. When I could see again, Nyala's reflection in the door caught my eye. I spun around, a question on my lips. It died on my tongue, and all I could do was stare in horror. "No," I gasped. "Nyala!" She tried to speak, but blood bubbled past her lips and dribbled down her chin. More spilled from a wound on her chest. Crimson stained her white shirt, spreading to cover her entire front. I reached for her, but she was yanked out of reach by a gust of wind. A figure appeared behind her. Hands crept over her shoulders. Then a head rose over hers. Gabriel. Fire shot at my arms and flickered before my eyes. Let her go. His lips spread wide in a vicious sneer. He waved his hand and another gust of wind blew through the kitchen. 2 fresh gashes appeared on Nyala's body. She flinched from the pain. I strained to get to her, but a wall of wind held me back. I shouted and cursed, the flames growing higher and higher until they reached the ceiling. "Jack," Nyala whispered, raising her hand toward me. "Please." Gabriel cackled, raised his hand once more, and let it drop. Nyala's eyes widened, and she clapped a hand to her throat. Blood spilled through her fingers, and her eyes rolled back. "Nyala, no." The wall of wind that had held me back vanished, and I staggered forward into nothing but air. I whipped around, searching for any sign of Nyala. She wasn't here. Neither was Gabriel. There was no blood on the floor, and my fire was tucked safely away. Hallucination. It was another damned hallucination. My frustrated grunt turned into a cough. I fell into the kitchen table, using it to keep myself standing upright. Searing pain exploded across my chest. My vision blurred and I hit my knees. On all fours, I struggled to simply stay conscious, but the lightheadedness was making that difficult. Blood filled my mouth and I covered it with a hand. The sound of steps rushing toward the kitchen met my ears. I tried to raise my head to see who it was. Then a strong set of hands hauled me upright and got me in a chair.
"Jack, can you hear me?"
Zach asked.
"Jack? Bry, get him some water and a towel."
Talking was impossible right then. I glanced at the doorway, waiting for Nyala to show up too.
"She's still upstairs,"
Zach told me.
"Do you want me to get her?"
I shook my head, then tried to speak. All that did was trigger another round of coughing that left me feeling like someone had run me over with a car. Twice. When I could finally breathe again, I took the towel from Briar and wiped my mouth. After a few sips of water, I slouched in the chair and nodded to them.
"Sorry about that."
"You're fine," Briar assured me. "Do you want anything else? Maybe something stronger than water?"
"I wouldn't turn down whatever you have to offer."
She nodded, then went and fetched 3 glasses and a bottle of whiskey. She brought them to the table, poured us all a drink, and sat down beside Zach. He hadn't stopped looking at me like I was going to fall over and die right there on the kitchen floor. To be quite honest, there was a chance that might happen. With a shaky hand, I lifted the glass to my mouth. The first sip burned my raw throat. The second was a little more soothing. It wasn't the same as having Nyala's frost on my skin. For now, it'd do. Having her see me like this wasn't what I wanted. "Are they all that bad?" Briar asked. "The coughing fits?" I asked, and she nodded. "Most of the time. Every now and then I get lucky and they don't nearly knock me out." I blinked, and the image of Nyala bleeding out caused me to jump. I sloshed whiskey over my hand.
"Damn it, sorry." "It wasn't just a coughing fit, was it?"
Zach asked, handing me a napkin. His voice was tight and his muscles tensed. The look in his eyes was haunted and filled with old anger and anguish. Without turning to her, he reached for Briar's hand on the table and held it.
"You said the curse will start to make you hallucinate."
"It is." I figured there was no point in lying. I might not entirely trust them all yet, but as of right now, they were my only chance at finding the dagger. Maybe. Hopefully.
"You saw something before the fit. What was it?"
Zach asked. This time, I drained the rest of the whiskey and motioned to the bottle. Briar nudged it toward me. While I poured a second glass, I said softly, "It was Nyala being killed by Gabriel. The time before that, it was her already dead at my feet. And before that, it was my brother running me through with a dagger."
"Does Nyala know?"
"No," I snapped at Zach, then immediately lowered my head. "No, she doesn't, and I don't want her to." I drained the second glass and debated on getting a third. Being drunk probably wasn't the best way to end the day.
"I never intended to get anyone else involved."
"Why did you?" Briar asked, not unkindly. I hunched over the table, remembering that first day at Academy. Picturing Nyala and hearing her voice helped chase away more of the ache that still lingered in my chest. "Have you ever just seen someone and been drawn to them?" Flames danced around my fingertips, then wound up my hand. "They pull you in and you have no idea why. Something about the way they look at you, the way they smile. It just hits home." The flames moved higher, twisting and churning until they mimicked the patterns Nyala's frost always made on my skin. Raising my arm, I set my elbow on the table and studied those designs. I tried not to be near her. I told myself to stay away and keep her safe, to save her from grief when I failed to break the curse, but I couldn't do it. "Holy shit," Briar whispered. "You love her." I met her eyes, expecting her to be pissed. Instead, she was beaming, but not at me. She was looking right at Zach. He raised her hand to his lips and kissed the back of it. Her fire reached out and wound about them there at the table. While they shifted their gazes back to me, all I could do was shrug. "I shouldn't, but I do," I whispered. "I did from the first moment I saw her. My parents always told me the story of how they fell in love, that it was love at first sight. I'd never believed them, told them they were crazy, that love like that didn't exist.
Then you met Nyala, and she changed everything.
Zack chuckled while he said, "Trust me, I know the feeling." I had no doubt that he did. I didn't have to be around him and Briar long to sense the love they had for each other. It was easy to see their future laid out for them, happy and filled with life. The comfort that merely thinking of Nyala brought me seeped away, replaced with a frigid, painful cold of what my future held. I wanted to hold on to the hope that I could have that with Nyala, that I could move past this dark part of my life, but there were still so many unknowns in the way. Even if I managed to break the curse, there was still my plan to deal with Gabriel and Chance. And I had no idea how I was going to go after General Erickson. I couldn't let her live, though. I couldn't let any of them get away with destroying my family.
How much worse is it going to get? The curse, I mean.
A bitter laugh escaped my lips at Zack's question.
I told you the symptoms, and something tells me you held back for Nyala's sake, he argued.
That was true. From Nyala's face, while I'd been talking earlier, she'd known only some of what the curse did to its victims. I wasn't about to divulge how much worse it could get.
How bad?
Briar asked. The pain will increase until it's constant, I told them. Stabbing pain that will probably start to drive me mad. Breathing will become a struggle until it feels as if I'm suffocating or drowning. The hallucinations will become more frequent. Soon enough, I won't be able to tell what's real.
How long until you reach that point?
Briar asked. There's no way to know. The last person who was cursed by this item held out for 5 years. It had only been a little over a year and a half. I shouldn't have been at this stage yet. I should have had more time. And yet something seemed to have affected the curse's timeline. It's gotten worse far faster than I anticipated.
When did that happen?
Zack asked. Not long after I showed up at Academy. It's why I wasn't able to hide the fits from Nyala. They became too frequent and too intense. Zack tapped his fingers on the table, a contemplative look on his face. Then he stood up. I'm going to make some calls, see if there's anything else about this coin of creeping death. And the dagger of vitality is the only thing that can break it. It's like I said, I've tried just about everything else. If that dagger doesn't work, I'm screwed. Right. My brothers are already making inquiries as to where it is now, Zack informed me. And Nick's been talking to another of our team. He's extremely talented with potions and should have a batch of them for you shortly. Potions? To help control the fits and the other symptoms brought on by the curse, he explained. There's no guarantee they'll work or for how long, but it's what we can offer for now. Why? I blurted. Why what? Why are you helping me? I asked Zack, then looked to Briar. Why offer to put yourselves through the trouble? You don't know me. Neither of you owes me anything.
Your family was murdered,
Briar said, and her eyes darkened.
Some of us know what that feels like, especially when you're not able to get to the person responsible, when it takes far too long to bring them down. We know what it feels like to be betrayed, too.
She began to shake, and Zack was at her side in an instant, pulling her into a hug. She held on to him while he softly whispered to her. Everything Nyala had told me about them and what they had endured hit me for a second time. They'd survived through so much shit. Hell, Briar had technically been dead. And here they were, offering to help a stranger. I couldn't do this to them or Nyala. I pushed back from the table and headed for the kitchen door.
Where do you think you're going?
Briar called after me. I can't stay here. I can't be around you and your family and Nyala, I said, ignoring the stabbing pain in my chest at the thought of never seeing her again. I appreciate your offering to help, but this is my fight.
You love her, and you're going to walk away?
I spun around, noting the fires burning in Briar's eyes. That's why I have to leave, don't you get that? I'm doing this to save her. If I don't break the curse, I'm going to die. If I do break the curse, my insane brother and Gabriel are still out there. They'll come for me, and I won't have her getting hurt or worse trying to protect me. All I had to do was walk out that front door and not look back. I turned around and forced myself to move one step at a time. A few feet away from the door, Briar said my name, and I paused.
I know how you feel,
she said, her voice tinged with sorrow.
thinking leaving is the only way to protect those you love, or that you're better off fighting the enemy alone. I know it better than most. I also know how stupid it is to let yourself believe it's the only way.
It is.
No, it's not.
The fierceness in her words dragged me back around. Fires burned in her eyes and around her hands. Zack had moved forward and now stood behind her with his hand resting on her shoulder. His face was pinched in anger and pain, as if he was reliving the worst moment of his life. His gaze was focused on Briar. The love for her poured out of him with his magic. It joined her fire and twisted around her in a protective embrace. When everything was going on with Xylon and the Masters and my bitch of a sister, I hit a low point, Briar told me, her voice quivering. I let them all convince me I was alone in my fight, let them drag me further and further into that looming darkness. I thought the only way to keep everyone safe from the weapon they were turning me into was to kill myself. Zack's magic flared, and an ethereal glow appeared around Briar. Nyala had said she'd nearly died. She hadn't told me how or what led up to that moment. Slowly, Briar tugged up the sleeves of her sweater, revealing 2 long scars on her forearms. I was wrong, Jack. I was horribly wrong. I put Zack and everyone else through so much shit because I let myself believe leaving them was the only way to keep them safe. Briar went on. You love Nyala, and I can tell you right now that she loves you. I've never seen her so fiercely protective of anyone or care so much, and her magic reacts to you in ways I've never seen before. She loves you, and if you walk out that door to protect her, you'll break her heart. That and she'll probably go after you, which will put her in danger anyway. For a long moment, the 3 of us stood in the foyer of the Morris mansion. If I left now, the chances of finding the dagger were slim at best. I would essentially be killing myself. But if I stayed, Nyala would have to watch me suffer while the curse worsened. It was a double-edged blade no matter how I looked at it. But Briar was right. I've been on my own since my parents were killed, I whispered. I guess I forgot what it meant to be able to trust anyone again.
Understandable, Briar agreed. So does that mean you're staying?
On one condition, I said, and Briar and Zack nodded. If it gets to the point where I'm not going to make it, if I do end up dying from this curse, I have to know you 2 will be there for Nyala for me. Help her get over me.
How about you just don't die?
Briar said, and Zack sighed.
What?
We promise, Zack said. Nyala's family, and we look after our own. Then I'll stay, I said, and moved away from the front door.
You should get some rest while you can, Briar told me. We already contacted Headmaster Hook and caught him up on some of the situation. Not every detail, but enough, she assured me after I started to protest. We assured him you and Nyala would be back at Academy in a couple of days.
And he listened to you, just like that? Zack barked a laugh. We have some weight to throw around. Happens when you save the headmaster's life and everyone else's from a mad necromancer.
You can use the guest room you woke up in, Briar told me. Get some sleep.
I thanked them and figured heading upstairs to rest for a bit wasn't a bad idea. That and I wanted to check in on Nyala. Halfway up the stairs, I turned back, meaning to thank Zack and Briar again. When I glanced toward the living room, Zack had Briar bundled in his arms and kissed the top of her head. She was saying something to him, but it was too quiet for me to make out. He was nodding at whatever it was. They parted, and he ran his fingers lightly over the scars on her arms. Then he cupped her face and kissed her like there was no tomorrow. Quietly as possible, I darted up the steps, letting them have their privacy. I couldn't even begin to imagine what Zack had gone through watching Briar bleed out. Watching her die. The hallucinations of Nyala dying hit me like a punch to the gut. I walked faster through the upstairs hallway, needing to see her face. Her room was only a few down from mine on the 2nd floor. I knocked. There was no answer, and worry set in. Nyala? Gently, I eased open the door. At the sight of her lying on the bed, passed out, I let out a sigh of relief. I slipped into the room and dragged the blankets up to cover her. She shifted, but didn't wake. Leaning over, I pressed my lips to her forehead.
I love you, I whispered. I tried not to, but I can't help it. I kissed her once more, then let her be to sleep. Back in the guest room I'd been given, I paced around for a little while, wondering if I shouldn't come clean now and tell the Pierce brothers about General Erickson. But I knew far too little about them to decide if they'd even believe the real story of who was there the night my parents were murdered. When I became too exhausted to stand up anymore, I tossed my shirt on the floor and fell onto the bed, waiting for sleep to come. I was right on the edge, drifting between consciousness and dreams, and the door to my bedroom opened. A gentle brush of cold air flowed over me. Nyala. I opened my eyes right as she reached the bed. With a smile, I lifted the blankets and she climbed in to lie beside me. She snuggled close, resting her hand on my chest. Frost flowed out from her palm and spread. Holding her, I settled into that soothing cold and shut my eyes. Right as I was about to fall asleep, she whispered, I love you. I rolled to my side and drew her into my arms. She hugged me back, and we fell asleep, our magic as entwined as our bodies were.
Chapter 7. Nyala.
I don't understand why he needs to talk to us,
Jack complained. We were back at Academy of Ancients. We'd stayed at the Morris estate another day to rest and ensure Jack's wounds were healed. It was now Thursday. I probably should have been worried on some level about all the classes I'd missed. But while I strolled through the main building with Jack's hand in mine, I realized how little I cared about school right then. Saving Jack was all I could focus on. Getting through the rest of the semester was gonna be a nightmare. He merely wanted to touch base, I reminded Jack. The second we'd arrived at Academy of Ancients early this morning, a message had been waiting for us. The student had handed it over, and Jack muttered a few curses about having to meet with Professor Hook.
I thought Briar said they took care of it,
Jack said. She said she did. I'm sure it's going to be fine. Why are you so worried? Jack didn't answer, but his hand tightened its grip. His skin became warmer, too. Trusting people, I was learning, was ungodly hard for him. I didn't blame him at all for being cautious. I doubted Hook wanted to do more than remind us that though we'd missed a few days, we were still responsible for making up our work. Outside Hook's office, the door opened, and I led the way inside. The man himself sat behind his desk, jotting down a note. The walls were lined with numerous shelves overflowing with books, trinkets, vining and flowering plants, as well as several framed photographs. I grinned, noting one of Briar and Zach from their wedding. Papers fluttered overhead, either zooming out the open window or out the office door. At our approach, Hook glanced up and grinned.
Ah, there you are. Please come in. Come in. Have a seat. I trust you are both feeling better?
He asked, a glimmer in his eyes. We are, I answered with a smile after we'd sat down in the plush chairs before his desk. And we're so sorry for missing so many classes. Hook nodded, then leaned back in his chair.
Nyala, Briar and Zach told me.
I kept the smile plastered on my face. Told you what? Hook's gaze shifted to Jack.
Who's attending my academy, and why?
Jack tensed in his chair. Headmaster. Hook held up his hand.
Though I do not like having students attend my campus with the intention of stealing from it, I understand that you are searching for an item to help you break a curse. They told you that?
Jack snapped.
You aren't in any trouble,
Hook assured him, and a sad frown replaced his warm smile.
But yes, they told me who you are. I am terribly sorry for what happened to your parents. I never had the chance to meet them, but the work they did was outstanding. They were incredible people, and from what I've seen of their son so far, he is too, he added, his tone gentle. I wish you would have come to me when you first arrived. I might have been able to assist you. I had no reason to trust you, Jack said. No, you didn't, but you do now. I've put out some feelers of my own to see if we can't track down this dagger of vitality. I might not be a Talon, but I have some decent connections of my own.
Was it ever here? I asked.
It was years ago. General Morris took it during one of his visits with my permission. He said it was required for a case he'd been working on.
I glanced at Jack, wondering probably the same thing he was. Had General Morris known the last person who'd been cursed by the coin of creeping death? Briar had said she hadn't had a chance to go through all of her father's old cases and files yet, but if she could find proof that the dagger did indeed lift the curse, there was more than a reason to hope it would do the same for Jack.
Zack has also informed me of your symptoms and the potions you've been given to counteract them.
Hook went on.
I've been given the recipes and passed them on to our potion master. When you're running low, you're to inform me immediately.
Jack remained in his seat. Flames burned in his eyes, and he had the same look of confusion he'd had back at the Morris estate.
I don't understand you people,
he whispered, shaking his head. Hook barked a laugh.
Yes, we are an odd bunch,
he said.
But Briar and Zack and Nyala have all done so much for Academy and me. I owe them all a great debt.
I shifted in my chair. I'd hardly done as much as the others, and after, I'd nearly let my fear defeat me. Hook tilted his head, studying me.
Jack, would you give Nyala and me a moment?
Hook asked.
Yeah,
Jack said, after getting a nod from me.
I'll wait for you in the hall. And thank you, Headmaster Hook. I'm not sure what even to say at this point.
How about promising not to go breaking into any more buildings?
I can do that.
Jack kissed my cheek, then left the office. The door shut softly behind him. Hook rose from behind the desk and walked around the office. He picked up a small metal watering can and went about tending to the plants lining the far wall near the windows.
Professor Keller tells me you've come quite far these last few months.
I didn't realize she was keeping you up to date on my classes, I muttered. Hook chuckled.
No need to sound so aggravated with me.
He sighed, setting down the can and carefully removing some dead leaves from a vining plant that took up an entire shelf.
As many of the students here seem to think I'm blind, I'm well aware of what happens on these grounds and the issues that my students have.
He moved a few of the vines around, gave a satisfied nod, and turned to face me once more.
I'm glad to see you aren't letting past events hold you back anymore.
I had some help.
Everyone needs a good support system, and it looks like you've added a new person to yours.
Are you really okay with helping Jack? I asked.
Briar and Zack made quite the compelling argument if I tried to kick him out.
Hook said with another good-natured laugh.
I see great potential in him, as I do in you.
I looked down at my hands, remembering how I'd created that bird in the wastelands. I thought I'd hit the highest level of what I could do. Then everything with Xylon happened, and I couldn't use my magic. I was terrified for so long. Jack showed up here at the right time for him to help me, and vice versa. And now I feel like my magic is growing. I'm doing things I never thought possible for me.
Sometimes all we're waiting for is the right inspiration. I would say you found it.
Hook came to me, and I stood up. He took one of my hands and held it firmly in his.
We'll all do our best to ensure you don't lose him, Nyala. I do have one favor to ask of you, though, too.
And what is that?
Please, for the love of the elements, don't turn into another Briar. I don't think I could handle 2 of you running around Academy.
I burst out laughing and told him I'd do my best not to. He reminded me to keep him posted on Jack's condition, and that he'd let me know if his contacts turned up any information on the dagger. I headed out and found Jack pacing in the hall.
What did he want? Are you sure you're not in trouble because of me?
He asked in a rush. I'm sure. He was just checking in, I said, slipped my hand into Jack's, and pulled him with me down the hall. Look, I know you have a hard time trusting people, and I get it. But Hook's one of the good guys. I don't want you putting any more strain on yourself, worrying about him knowing. Though I am sorry he caught us off guard like that, I added with a cringe. Remind me to yell at Bri later for not giving me a heads up. Jack grunted in agreement.
This still feels so surreal,
he said once we'd reached the door to my room. I opened it and led the way inside. What does?
Everything. I didn't expect you to still be here with me after you'd learned the truth, or to have so much help. I'm not entirely sure what to do with myself.
I grinned, trailing my fingers down his chest. We don't have to deal with lessons until tomorrow, I whispered, standing on my toes. I can think of a few things we could do to pass the time. His arm was around my waist in a blink. He pressed me to his body, and his fire coursed around us both.
Is that so? You'll have to share these ideas of yours with me, so I can fully understand what you mean.
I kissed his chin, then his jaw. His arm tightened, and his fire flared even brighter. When I finally reached his lips, Jack was humming with energy. He lifted me off my feet, carried me towards the couch, and kissed me until the only thing I cared about was whether we were going to end up passing out in the living room or if we'd make it to the bedroom. The first week back at Academy went far better than I'd anticipated. The potions Jack was taking each morning were doing their job. The fits he'd had were hardly fits at all and passed within seconds. He wasn't coughing up blood either. And there'd been no hallucinations. Each day his optimism grew, and his mood improved that there was an end in sight to the curse. The only worry that kept bogging him down was the lack of news on the dagger's location. We knew it could take time. I'd hoped luck would have been on our side, and the Pierce brothers would have tracked it down by now. As long as the potions kept helping Jack, we had time. We caught up on the work we'd missed those few days, but we hardly spent any time apart. If we weren't in my apartment, we were in his, and if not there, we were studying in the library or working on our magic out on the grounds. After what we'd done in the wastelands, Jack and I had been working on using our summoning together. So far, we'd managed to create some interesting combinations of shields using frost and fire. It continued to amaze me how his fire didn't melt the frost, but bolstered its strength instead. Even when we weren't practicing, our magic continued to ignite around each other. Hardly a moment passed now when I wasn't showing off some ember-lit frost patterns on my hands, or that Jack wasn't sporting frost up his arms and across his chest. All it took was a simple brushing of our hands, and our magic was there, making itself known. If I'd had any doubts about the love I'd felt for him or he felt for me, those doubts were long gone. It was the end of another long day, and I was looking forward to doing nothing for the entire weekend. Winter break was only a few weeks away. Jack and I had plans to spend it together in Silent Heights. When I reached the door to my apartment, there was a note waiting for me. All it said was that my presence was requested in the small lily garden by the lake. The handwriting was Jack's. "What are you up to?" I mused, grinning while I quickly opened my door and went to put something on a little heavier for the chilly night. Once I had a thick sweater on and a jacket, I left my apartment and hurried toward the lake. The grounds were fairly empty by this time. Most of the students had headed inside to get out of the cold and were eating in the hall. The path leading to the lily garden was lit by 2 floating balls of bright red and orange flames. Once I approached, they jumped up and weaved around me, leading the way further down the trail. More firelight danced up ahead. The trees parted, and I laughed in delight. The 2 flames that had brought me here zipped away to join the others floating overhead, creating a network of flickering stars. The heat they gave off was enough for me to shed my jacket and drape it over my arm. The array of red and orange and yellow reflected off the surface of the lake, and near the water's edge, standing there waiting for me, was Jack. A blanket was laid out on the grass beside him, complete with what appeared to be takeout containers. "What's all this, then?" I asked. I figured something aside from the usual would be nice. Briar suggested the diner in town. "You drove all the way out there just to bring back dinner?" "I did, and it's still warm," he added. "May I take your jacket?" I handed it over, and Jack set it beside his on the blanket. He took my hand next, and we sat down together. He opened the food containers to reveal 2 double cheeseburgers with everything, cheese fries, and even produced 2 chocolate milkshakes from the basket nearby. "You have no idea how good this all looks right now," I said, my mouth already watering at the sight of the burger. "Good. Dig in." While we ate and talked, with Jack's fire keeping us company, it hit me that I wanted to have more nights like this. As long as we could track down that damn dagger, we could. Our laughter floated over the lake, and when the temperature dropped, the orbs of fire dropped lower, giving off more heat to keep us nice and toasty. After we finished eating, we merely sat and enjoyed the view of the lake. Jack pulled me back into the cradle of his body. More fire wrapped around us. He hugged me, and I sighed, relaxing into his embrace. "Can we spend every night like this?" I asked.
I'm sure we could if you wanted to,
he replied with a laugh. He pressed his lips to my neck, and I melted even more for him. He left kisses down to my shoulder, then back up to my earlobe. I shifted so I was sitting on his lap, and our mouths met in a heated kiss that rivaled the flames hovering overhead. His hands roamed beneath my sweater, leaving trails of pure fire that slipped around my torso. My frost, in turn, spread from my hands up his neck and down to his chest. He laid me back on the blanket, and I laughed with him, more than ready to get lost in the night. Jack propped himself up on his elbows, his eyes glimmering with his inner fire. His smile fell, and he pulled back, smothering a cough behind his hand. "Are you all right?" I asked, sitting up with him. He nodded, but the cough continued. Soon he was struggling to get air. When blood dotted his lips, the optimism I'd built up since returning to Academy evaporated. So much for the potions working. I held on to Jack, keeping him upright and pressing a cooling hand to his chest. One by one the fires winked out until we were sitting in the dark. I held up my hand, drawing a thin stream of water from the lake nearby. With a twirl of my wrist, the water spread out in a shimmering blue network of glowing frost that hung above us and lit up the garden.
"I'm sorry,"
Jack whispered, his voice rough from the fit. "Don't apologize."
"I ruined our night."
"Nothing's ruined," I argued. "Just give me a second to get everything in the basket, then we can get you inside and into bed." Jack helped me, but he was shaking so badly by the time we were up and moving back toward the dorm building. I got him inside his apartment. The second he hit the bed, he passed out. His breathing remained ragged, and I couldn't bear to leave him alone. While I watched over him, I texted Briar so she and the others would know the potions were starting to fail. "We have time," I whispered, gently pushing the hair from Jack's forehead. I leaned over and kissed him there, glad he was asleep so he couldn't see the fear that was probably visible in my eyes. "We have time. I'm going to save you. Just you wait." I curled up beside Jack and watched over him for the rest of the night. Chapter 8. Jack.
Gabriel's cackle reverberated in my ears. He shoved that coin into my palm while my parents shouted for him to stop. Then their blood was wetting the floor, and their eyes were glazed over in death. I crawled to them, willing this not to be real. The mark on my palm burned, reminding me of how I'd been handed a death sentence of my own. My hand was outstretched toward my mother. Then her face shimmered, and I was no longer looking at her. Bile rose in my throat. "Nyala? No, this isn't right," I mumbled. "You're not here. You can't be here." My trembling hand fell onto her shoulder. She was cold, and not from the frost that usually decorated her skin. She was cold as death. Her eyes were empty, void of the vibrancy I'd fallen in love with. Blood coated her front. Words failed me, and all I could do was drag her into my lap and hold her. This wasn't real. This couldn't be. "So pathetic," a voice said behind me. He clicked his tongue, and his steps approached. When he came into view, I glared at Chance's false sympathetic frown. "Such a shame. She was quite the looker." "Get the fuck away from me," I snarled. "Or what?" Chance, a younger version of me, crouched on the other side of Niall's dead body. "You're dying, Jack. You've been dying for months. Do you really think that dagger's gonna save you?" "It's going to work. Then I'm gonna come after you," I seethed, clutching at Nyala's dead body. "I'm gonna tear you apart for what you did." Nightmare. That's what this was. Another horrible nightmare. Or a hallucination. I honestly couldn't tell the difference these days. I should have stopped talking to the image of Chance and made myself wake up. But my mind was trapped until the curse decided to release me. "Are you now?" Chance shrugged. "Are you really going to kill your own brother?" "You tried to kill me. I'm merely returning the favor." Chance's smile widened impossibly more. He snapped his fingers, and I was standing in Nyala's apartment at Academy. Was I awake? Everything looked right. Had I fallen asleep in her place instead of mine? The softest whimper of pain came from behind me. I spun around and my heart stuttered. Nyala stood a few feet away from me.
Her mouth was moving, but no words were coming out. She started to cough, and blood speckled her lips. She pressed one hand to her chest. Her other faced outward. There on her palm was the same mark that had been burned into my skin from the cursed coin before it had faded away.
"Jack,"
she rasped, then doubled over and hit the floor. Heart thundering in my chest, I rushed toward her, falling to my knees at her side. "This isn't real. I won't let it be real."
"The curse,"
she whispered, clutching at my hand.
"You did this to me."
"What?"
"You gave it to me. How could you do that?"
I kept shaking my head, willing myself to snap out of it. Something heavy hit the floor beside us. The coin, balancing on its edge, sat there mocking me.
"You killed me,"
Nyala whispered. A violent coughing fit ripped through her. She choked on the blood spilling out of her mouth, and in seconds went still in my arms. I bolted upright, the fire at the ready in my hands. "Easy. And put that away, would you? Unless you want me throwing you in a damn cage."
"Zach?"
While the horrid image of Nyala dying receded, my vision cleared. Zach was sitting in a chair to the right of my bed. He was bent over, his arms resting on his knees while he watched me with a steady gaze. "You all right?" he asked. I closed my hands around the fires burning there. "Nightmares. Sorry. No need to apologize, not like you set me on fire. Yet." He smiled, but I didn't return it. "Do you want to talk about it?" "What's there to talk about? It never changes." I swung my legs over the side of the bed. I wanted to stand up, but felt so damn shaky merely sitting there. A week had passed since my attempt at having a fun date night with Nyala. That had ended in disaster. Every day that followed, I'd gotten worse. The potions would work for a few hours now, if I was lucky. "I didn't think talking about it would help me either," Zach said. "But after a while, that darkness builds up inside of you. It drags you down. There was a time when I let myself fall into that depression. I told myself I could handle it alone. Watching those you love die over and over, though, starts to tear you apart." I turned enough so I could see him. His eyes were downcast and shimmering with his spirit magic. "You still have nightmares about that moment, when Briar died?" "I think I always will," he admitted. He stared at his hands, palms facing up. "Some nights I wake up seeing my hands soaked in her blood. If it's not that horrid image, I'm back at the hospital, watching her take her last breath." He curled his hands and straightened in the chair. I didn't want Bri to relive those moments and kept them to myself, but that made it worse. It's taken us a long time, but we learned how damaging it could be to try and face those memories alone. If you don't want to tell me, then you need to tell Nyala. "No," I snapped and hung my head. "Sorry, I can't tell her what I see. It's bad enough I can't hide how bad the pain's getting. If I tell her I'm watching her die and that she's accusing me of cursing her..." I gripped the edge of the bed, knowing exactly how she'd look at me. She'd worry herself into not sleeping or eating more than she's already doing. Or she's worrying that much because she knows you're keeping shit from her. I think you should listen to him. My head snapped up. Standing in the doorway with that damned smug smirk on his face was Chance. He wiggled his fingers at me in a mocking wave. "Oh, look at that, Jack, I think you're making a friend." Chance crooned. "Isn't that sweet?" "Jack?" Oh, now this was just great. Reminding myself Chance wasn't real, I told Zach I was fine. "Yeah, sure you are," he muttered. "Talk to Nyala." "To what end, huh? You've seen how she is, walking around half asleep? That's on me. Everything she's going through is on me." "You got that right," Chance chimed in. Ignoring him, I pushed off the bed, and after a second of making sure I wasn't going to topple over, I stormed out of the bedroom into the kitchen. Chance was already there waiting for me, leaning against the counter near the coffee pot. "You're not to blame for any of this," Zach argued, standing on the other side of the kitchen island while I started a pot of coffee. I wasn't even sure what time of day it was. I glanced at the clock on the wall. Late afternoon. Nyala would be back from her classes soon. She'd want to know if I'd go with her to the hall to eat, or if I was content to keep hiding in the apartment. Being up here was safer. having a fit in front of the entire student body, wasn't how I wanted to spend my time. "How am I not?" I asked once the coffee was brewing. "I told you this is going to get worse." "And what happened to being optimistic?"
"Yeah, Jack," Chance muttered before I could answer. "What happened to thinking you actually have a chance of beating this curse? Don't tell me you're giving up already."
"Shut up," I whispered through gritted teeth. Zach's brow furrowed. "What was that?" "Nothing." I let out a steadying breath and forced my eyes to stay looking at Zach and not at the hallucination of my brother now moving around behind him. Chance poked Zach in the face, then cackled. I pinched the bridge of my nose, reminding myself why losing my shit right then was a bad idea. "You shouldn't lose hope," Zach said, and Chance doubled over with laughter.
"Oh, you definitely should," the hallucination said,
wiping a tear from his eye. I wanted to flip him off, but stopped myself at the last second. "Why not?" I asked Zach. "Has there been any news from your brothers? Or Headmaster Hook? Does anyone have a single lead on where the dagger is? Or anything else that might miraculously save me?"
"Not yet, but they will. Trust me."
"I am trusting you," I said, not sure when my voice had become so loud. "I'm putting my life in someone else's hands, and I hate it. I hate that I'm doing this to Nyala and her friends. I hate that I'm making her suffer." I leaned on the counter, my body already weakening, and all I'd been doing was standing here for a few minutes. "Everything's going to keep getting worse," I whispered. "Everything."
"So you've said many times now,"
Zach said. "And none of you seem to want to accept that for what it is," I yelled. "Do you think I want Nyala watching me choke on my own blood? Or see me writhing in pain on the floor? Do you think I want her around when shit gets really bad and I lose my mind? What happens when I don't recognize her, or anyone? What happens when I become trapped in a hallucination I can't get out of? I'm going to die, and I won't hurt her any more than I already have." I sucked in a breath, feeling the first pains of a fit coming on. I should have left when I had the chance.
"Really?"
Nyala said from behind me, and I flinched.
"You're such a stubborn jackass. You know that?"
Shit, hadn't even heard the door open. I glowered at Zach for not giving me a heads up. He shrugged and crossed his arms. Slowly, I turned to face Nyala, thankful that, for the moment, Chance appeared to have disappeared. Briar stood right behind her, an equally furious look on her face, while flames burned in her eyes. "Nyala, don't!" she snapped, and frost shot out of her hands. It spread across the floor in an elaborate, chaotic pattern that matched the one covering her hands.
"We've had this conversation over and over. Why don't you just let it go, huh? Why?"
"You know why," I argued.
"Then you should know why I can't leave you here, not alone."
She came toward me, but the room spun suddenly, and I was on the floor the next second. A stabbing pain exploded in my chest. The coughing started, and I shifted to my side, spitting up globs of blood on the floor. Nyala stayed right beside me the whole time, her frost quickly extending from her to me. I didn't have the heart to tell her the cold barely made a dent in my discomfort anymore. I stayed there on the floor on all fours for what felt like an eternity. Each gasp of air in was like I had shards of glass embedded in my lungs. Eventually, the coughing stopped.
"Right, let's get you back to bed,"
Nyala said softly.
"Zach?"
Between the two of them, they got me on my feet and down the hall. They sat me on the bed, and Nyala helped me lay back on the pillows. He said he'd speak to her later, and after giving me a pointed look, exited the bedroom. Nyala only left me long enough to grab a fresh washcloth from the bathroom so she could wipe the blood from my face. I caught her wrist, stopping her. "I can do it. You go snag some dinner. Maybe get some sleep."
"I'm not leaving you right now. Shut up and deal with it."
She removed my hand from her wrist and cleaned up my face. She tossed the stained cloth on the nightstand, then shifted around so she was lying beside me, her arm draped over my stomach.
"Jack?"
"Hmm?"
"Promise me you won't try to leave."
"I can't do that."
"Yes, you can."
She sat up and looked right into my eyes.
"Promise me you'll let us help you."
"Even if you can't? Even if we can't find the dagger and the curse is going to kill me?"
"It won't."
"It might." I argued softly and reached up to cup her cheek. I won't have you watch me go out like that.
It's not going to happen, do you hear me? It won't. Even if we can't find the dagger, we'll figure something else out.
Her words triggered my nightmare and how she'd accused me of cursing her. Shit. Was there a way to transfer the curse from one person to another? If there was, and she figured it out, she'd do it if she thought it'd give me more time. I'll make you that promise if you make me one, I said, sitting up with her. I won't leave you if you promise that you will not put your own life at risk to save mine. She avoided my eyes and started to climb off the bed. I caught her hands, then pulled her to me, trapping her in an embrace.
Jack.
Promise me, Nyala, and I'll promise you. I leaned in, brushing her lips in a gentle kiss. She cursed, then kissed me back harder.
Promise,
she said against my lips.
But we're going to find the dagger. You'll see.
I wanted the moment to last longer, but exhaustion tugged at me. Before long, Nyala and I were lying back down. She fell asleep in seconds. I was right on the edge of joining her. Then I spotted the figure standing in the doorway. Chance was there, a murderous glint in his eyes. But he wasn't looking at me. He was focused on Nyala. I bit off his name and his eyes flickered to me. He tapped his forehead in a salute and vanished in a blink. I pulled Nyala tighter into my arms, wrapped us both in fire, and silently vowed that I'd kill Chance before he laid a hand on Nyala.
Chapter 9. Nyala. Jack's furious yell erupted from the bedroom. I raced toward it, already pulling frost to my hands. Fire seeped out from under the closed door. The sound of the furniture smashing was only interrupted by Jack shouting Chance's name and threatening to kill him. I reached for the door handle, the frost on my hand melting in seconds from the heat. I tried to push the door open, but the damn thing was locked.
You murderer!
Another crash sounded from inside the room.
You killed her!
Damn it, Jack, open the door! I banged my fist on it, willing him to hear me through whatever chaos the curse had unleashed on him tonight. Since winter break started a week ago, we'd been living in my apartment in Silent Heights, and every day went about as terrible as possible. Jack hardly slept through the night, too plagued by nightmares of the night his parents died. If he wasn't seeing them, he was witnessing me die or succumb to the curse. At least now I knew why he'd made me promise not to put myself in harm's way to save him. Though if I could find a way to transfer the curse to me, I'd do it in a heartbeat. Every day that passed broke my heart a little more. There'd been no news on the dagger yet, nothing to keep giving him hope that there was an end to the torment in sight that didn't come from him dying. And only 2 days ago, I'd finally gotten him to confess that he'd been seeing his brother. That had been going on since before the break. I'd been furious he kept it from me. That had started another argument that ended with us holding each other and me trying to remind him that we could do this. He was slipping out of my grasp. If we couldn't figure out a way to contain the symptoms, I feared one of these days I wouldn't be able to bring him back to reality.
I'm going to kill you,
Jack shouted, his voice mangled with anguish.
I'm gonna burn you alive.
I threw my shoulder into the door, but the damn lock held. I stepped back, raised my hands, and sent 2 bursts of frost to cover the door. Unlike the times he was coherent, when he was trapped in a hallucination, his magic worked against mine. Keeping the frost going with the amount of fire on the other side was a struggle that nearly brought me to my knees. The ice layered on, and finally the door cracked beneath the onslaught. Rushing it, I threw my full weight against it. The door burst open and slammed into the wall. Amid the destruction of the bed, dresser, 2 nightstands, and what had been a hanging mirror, was Jack. Fire swirled around him in a roaring stream of red and orange. His chest heaved, and his eyes were fixed on a point across the room. The walls and ceiling were charred from his fire. Sweat dripped down his face. He was trembling under that protective layer of fire. Jack, I said loud and clear. Jack, look at me. He made no motion he'd heard me, his face scrunched in a murderous sneer, and he raised his hands toward whatever he was seeing. But then his eyes went wide, his arms fell, and he cursed Chance for running from his death. I let out a breath of relief, thinking the hallucination was over, but the nightmare hadn't ended yet. Jack's face crumpled into one of sorrow. He fell to his knees, reaching for something I couldn't see. Tears slipped down his cheeks. When he whispered my name, his body curling over as if he was holding someone on his lap. Frost seeped from me and spread across the floor and up the walls. I couldn't hold it back. To his eyes, I was dead on the floor. He'd failed me.
Nyala,
he murmured again.
I'm sorry. I'm so damn sorry. I did this. I killed you.
No, I responded and rushed around so I could kneel in front of him. Jack, I'm right here, okay? I'm not dead. What you're seeing isn't real. I took hold of his hands, squeezing them hard as I could. Jack? His hands twitched in mine. The frost spread to his skin and up his arms. He swayed for a second, then blinked like he was waking up. When his eyes flicked up to meet mine, they were clear.
Nyala?
I had no chance to reply. He dragged me into his arms, kissing the top of my head and hugging me tight. About time, I murmured, trying and failing to stop my own tears from falling. We sat on the floor for a long while, until he finally let me go enough that he could look at my face. Hey, he replied softly. When he took in the destruction of the room, he cringed.
Shit, I'll take care of all this.
What you're going to do is get your ass off the floor and into bed so you can rest.
It's getting worse,
he whispered, not moving to get up yet.
Each time, it's so much worse. I can't keep...
The cough cut him off. He covered his mouth with his hand, then bolted from the bedroom to the bathroom. I followed after him while he doubled over the sink, spitting up blood. The fit hardly lasted a minute, but he was shaking and couldn't hold himself upright. With him leaning on me, I got him to the other bedroom and he lay down. His eyes closed in seconds, then he was out. I stayed with him, holding his hand and running my fingers through his hair. How much more of this could he take? It wasn't just his body that was breaking down, it was his mind. If that went, if I wasn't able to break through the hallucinations, what would happen then? A knock echoed through the apartment. Quietly I moved away from the bed, closed the door so Jack would hopefully get some sleep, and went to answer the front door. Briar and Zach were there waiting for me. I started to say hello, but Briar immediately rushed in for a hug.
Are you okay?
She asked, setting me back.
Is it Jack? What happened?
It was a bad day, I told them, leading the way inside the apartment. One of the worst so far. I gave them a quick rundown of what I'd witnessed. Briar cursed, but it was Zach's sudden look of guilt that threw me. I crossed my arms and stared him down. What?
What?
He repeated. You found something out, and now you're not sure if you should tell me.
We stopped by for 2 reasons, actually,
he said, and he held up the leather bag that was slung crossways over his chest.
New batch of potions, stronger than the last. These should help combat the symptoms.
He pulled out a hard plastic case from inside the bag and handed it over.
He needs to drink a full one every day. That's enough to get him through the rest of the break. There'll be more waiting for him on campus when you go back.
I took the potions and set them on the kitchen counter. You should try and get some sleep, Briar told me. We can keep an eye on Jack. I don't want to bother him right now. He's passed out, and the other room needs to be cleaned up.
We'll take care of it. Go crash on the couch,
Briar instructed, and gave me a helpful shove toward the living room.
We've got everything handled for a bit.
I dug my feet in and spun around to face them. After you tell me the second reason you're here. When neither fessed up, I rolled my eyes. I'm not going to sleep until one of you says something. Spit it out. It can't be that bad. Zach rubbed the back of his neck, looking as if he wanted to be anywhere else.
I'll tell you if you promise not to blame yourself.
Why would I do that? Briar held my hand, sadness turning the flames in her eyes dark blue.
Because you're a good person, and you're gonna do just that.
Just tell me already, I demanded, my stomach twisting into a vicious knot. Briar hesitated until I snapped her name.
Fine, fine. We found out more about the curse.
And?
And the reason Jack's symptoms became worse when he was at Academy was because of you.
Briar blurted. Confused, I shook my head and backed away. What do you mean? How?
When the person cursed finds their true love, the curse amplifies. It's beyond cruel.
Zack muttered.
But there's the truth of it. Jack loves you, Nyala, and the curse feels that.
So if he hadn't met me, talked to me, then he'd have more time? Nyala, this isn't your fault, Briar said, but I wrenched myself away from her and stormed through the living room. How is it not? I should have let him be, I ranted. If I had, he'd have moved on by now, right? He might have already found the dagger, but he didn't. I went utterly still, realizing there was only one way I could help Jack now. I have to leave.
What?
Zack shook his head.
That won't do any good.
How do you know? Desperation seeped into my bones, and frost quickly spread across the floor. If I leave, maybe we can trick the curse into thinking Jack was wrong. I have to break it off with him. I have to go.
The hell you do,
Jack snapped. I whirled around. He stood at the end of the hall, using the wall for support to stay upright. If my leaving gives you more time, then I'll do it.
It won't matter.
He came toward me one measured step at a time.
The love I have for you isn't going to simply vanish.
It's killing you, I yelled, entirely at the end of what I could handle. I'm killing you.
The curse is killing me, Jack argued, and I'm not about to give up the one good thing in my life right now, especially if I only have so much time left to enjoy it.
Tears burned in my eyes, and I swiped them away. Jack cupped my cheeks and brought me in for a gentle kiss.
I tried to stay away from you once, remember? Look how well that turned out,
he said with a smile.
It's you and me, Nyala. You made me promise to stay. Don't leave me now. If I don't have you, if I can't see you or hear your voice or your laugh, I'll have nothing to hold on to.
Unable to stop the tears then, I let them fall. I hugged Jack as hard as I could. Briar told him we should try and get some rest while they took care of the apartment. When she said Zack's brothers would possibly be joining us soon, I gave her a questioning look. She said she had no other information to give and was waiting on them. Jack tugged my hand, and after he downed one of the new potions, I let him lead me down the hall to the bedroom. Without a word, we climbed into bed together, and I was asleep the second my head hit the pillow. I sipped on the coffee Jack had brought to me. We'd slept through the night and well into the morning. He hadn't suffered from any nightmares, and I hadn't woken up until I'd heard a commotion coming from the living room. I was glad to see the newest batch of potions was working that fast. I'd been worried they wouldn't work at all. The question now was how long they would last this time around. Jack took his seat beside me on the couch. Briar and Zack occupied the bar stools near the kitchen counter. Luke and Nick were standing near the back door, neither of them appearing as if they came bearing the news we'd been anxiously waiting to hear. Well, I asked, unable to take the silence any longer. We're awake and we're caffeinated. Spit it out already.
You really have to spend less time with Bry,
Luke said with a smile on his face. I grinned, and a burst of water I pulled from a glass of water left out on a table splashed him in the face. Jack choked on his coffee, and Briar clapped.
Well done, Nyala,
she said through her laughter.
See, I'm not the only one who loses patience with you lot.
At least I didn't set your feet on fire, I told Luke. He shook out his hair like a dog.
I suppose there's that.
He swiped his hand down his face and sighed.
I wish we came bearing news on the dagger, but no leads have turned up yet.
Beside me, Jack tensed.
Nothing at all? No, but we're still waiting to hear back from a few of our informants. I have a feeling we'll know something in the next week or so.
Nick assured him.
But the dagger isn't the only thing we're hunting for.
Jack set his mug on the coffee table. His face went blank, but flames burned bright red in his eyes.
Chance and Gabriel,
Luke said.
We wanted to triple-check the intel before we passed it on to you. Unfortunately, by the time we arrived at the location, they were gone. But we do know they were at a black market a few hours south of here. Together.
I reached over and held Jack's hand. His skin warmed, and a ribbon of fire swirled around our joined hands.
How did he look? Jack asked. How was my traitorous brother doing? Our source said Chance appeared sickly, Luke said, and he and Gabriel were spotted arguing. Must be the guilt finally catching up with him,
Jack spat.
Did they buy anything at the auction, or was Gabriel selling? Buying.
Nick picked up the file folder he'd dropped on the coffee table earlier and handed it to Jack.
Anything you can tell us about the items he purchased might give us more to go on. Figure out where he and your brother are, if they're working with anyone else at the moment.
Jack took the folder and set it on his lap. He flipped it open. Right on top was a photograph taken from a decent distance. It showed 2 men facing each other. The one after it was the same 2 men but zoomed in. Chance was a younger version of Jack, and Luke hadn't lied. Chance certainly appeared sick. He was pale, and his cheeks were gaunt. He had the same colored eyes as Jack, lacking the fire, though. His t-shirt hung on his frame like it was 3 sizes too big. His hair was a shaggy mess, and he clearly hadn't shaved in a long while. Jack held up the photograph and glared as if he was going to reach through the picture and set his brother on fire. "Are you okay?" I whispered.
Fine.
He bit off and tucked the picture beneath the others.
I'm fine.
The next photograph was of Gabriel holding up a small blue velvet-lined case. In it appeared to be 6 circular flat objects. They looked like they could be bronze or burnished gold. There was something written on them, but I couldn't make it out. "Coins?" I asked Jack. "I've heard about 100 stories about magical coins."
Same.
Jack tilted the photograph, then squinted while holding it closer to his face.
It's too blurry to make out any details. There aren't any other pictures? None, and the seller wasn't willing to speak to our source,
Luke said.
Without more details to go off of, these could be useless trinkets to coins carrying a curse like the one I'm dealing with.
Jack tucked the pictures back into the folder and slapped it shut.
Did you get the name of the seller by chance? I have a few stones I could turn over.
"Is that a good idea?" I asked. "If they find out you're asking about them, what if they decide to come looking for you?"
She's right,
Luke said, cutting off whatever Jack had been about to say.
We're handling the situation. What if I give some names to you? People that would be willing to talk for the right price,
Jack said.
Trust me, you won't get anywhere, and Gabriel's not a fool. Your source might think he wasn't spotted, but Gabriel will know that someone was snapping pics of him.
Luke opened his phone and told Jack to give him the names. He rattled off 4 and warned them to be careful about approaching each of them.
If they smell Talon on you, they'll bolt, or worse.
He shook his head.
It really should be me. It's been a while since we've had any trouble,
Luke said with a grin.
We'll be just fine. Keep your phones handy,
Nick added while the brothers headed for the door.
And keep up with the potions. We'll check in soon enough.
Briar and Zach walked them out. Jack hunched over, his arms on his knees. He stared at the floor until 2 char marks appeared. I whispered his name and he apologized.
"I need a minute,"
he said. He stood up, kissed the top of my head, and strode down the hall. The door to the bedroom closed and I slumped on the couch. Here I'd hoped the danger had been located, and today's visit would be about how quickly we could find it. Instead, Jack had to be confronted by photographs of his younger brother. Jack may say Chance was being torn apart by guilt, but the man in those pictures appeared to have far more wrong with him than a heavy conscience. I hadn't wanted to suggest it in front of Jack, not with everyone else around, but it made me wonder. Was it possible that Chance was as much of a victim as Jack was? That he was being controlled somehow by Gabriel, used or threatened?
"You look like you need a drink,"
Briar said, falling onto the couch beside me. "I don't think we have anything left."
"Zach?"
He waved at us and made for the door.
On it. I'll bring back some food, too. This place is looking a bit bare.
"What would I do without you 2? I asked Briar. She draped her arm around my shoulders.
"Self-combust."
I laughed. "You're probably right." Glancing down the hall, I wondered how much pacing Jack was doing right now.
"Give him a few more minutes, then you can go check on him,"
Briar told me.
"He'll get through this. You both will."
"And if we don't?" Briar shrugged.
"We're not going down that road now, are we?"
"Shit, now you sound like me," I teased.
"Good."
She picked up the remote, turned on the TV, and switched over to the gaming console. She handed me a controller and grinned.
"How about we let go of some of that anxiety of yours? I still owe you a good ass-kicking from the last time we played."
Telling myself that Jack would be okay for a little longer while he dealt with his thoughts, I scooted to the edge of the couch and grinned at Briar. I'm ready to watch you lose again. Chapter 10. Jack.
Holiday music was playing in the living room of the apartment. When I'd first opened my eyes, I thought I was hearing things, but the music remained. Every now and then, Nyala's laughter filtered down the hall, usually accompanied by Briar's. They were up to something. Finished dressing in jeans and a long-sleeved green shirt, I chugged the potion that had been left for me on the nightstand with a note that said to drink it. The taste could have been far worse. The acidic tang it left on my tongue faded after a few seconds. For the last few days, I'd kept waiting for this batch of potions to fail. So far, they were holding up far better than the first round. And for the last few days, I'd been doing what I could not to lose my shit at seeing those photographs of Chance and Gabriel. So far I'd managed, but it was getting harder, knowing that they were working together while I was slowly dying. I could tell Nyala kept wanting to ask me about my brother. I was grateful she'd held back. Eventually the questions would come. How was I going to get through that conversation without letting slip what I planned to do once I caught up to my brother? Would be nearly impossible. Nyala had a way of getting me to spill information I never planned on telling her. I was already holding back General Erickson's involvement. If the lies kept piling up, I'd be crushed under them. Sighing and figuring there was no more reason to hide out in the bedroom, I opened the door and headed down the hall. Festive holiday lights had been strung along the ceiling, and more lit up the living room. Fresh pine greenery was everywhere, decorating door frames and the walls and framing the end of the hallway. A small 6-foot tree decked out in dark red and green ribbon sat near the back door. A shimmering star that looked as if it was made of ice perched on its top. More icicle ornaments decorated the branches, glistening in the abundance of red, green, and white lights that were everywhere.
Hey!
Nyala's cheerful voice greeted me a second before she was in my arms. She kissed me, and I wound my arms about her, pulling her in closer.
I was wondering when you were going to wake up.
What's all this for? I asked with a laugh.
Happy Yule,
she said, and kissed me again. I could have smacked myself in the head. How had I forgotten the damned holiday? My panic must have shown on my face, because Nyala laughed and told me not to worry about anything.
Tonight is about drinking, eating, and playing games. We all agreed not to do gifts, so get that look off your face. It's time we just had some fun.
She patted my cheek, and I gave in. When was the last time I celebrated Yule? The realization that it had been years made it hard to speak past the lump that formed in my throat. You did a great job with the decorations, I told her.
I'm glad you approve. Some last-minute shopping.
Zack and Briar handed us 2 glasses of a warm beverage that smelled of cinnamon and whiskey. Not long after, there was a knock at the door, and the rest of the Pierce brothers joined the party. They weren't the only ones to arrive. I was introduced to Hunter and Trish as well. More of their extended family, they said, and Talons. At first, I was too overwhelmed by everyone's good moods to do much but stand there holding my drink and smiling like a damned idiot. Then the board games were dragged out, and before long, I was cackling right along with the others. The evening gave way to night, and yet the party was nowhere close to ending. After a while, the familiar scents and sights had me longing for home and the family I'd lost. I'm going to step outside for a second, I told Nyala.
Are you okay?
Yeah, I said, and kissed her forehead. I just need some air. I stepped out onto the balcony, and the sounds of the party muted slightly once I closed the door. The night was cold, and I summoned fire to wind up my arms and keep me warm. Snow had begun to fall, blanketing Silent Heights in glistening white. Between the sound of the party behind me and the streets decorated for Yule, I couldn't hold back the pain and grief that bubbled up. Tears gathered in my eyes, then slipped down my cheeks. Behind me, the door opened, and 2 arms slipped around my waist. Nyala hugged me, resting her cheek against my back, and didn't say a word. She didn't have to. Her presence was more than enough to help stem the flood of memories that had started running through my mind. My mother loved Yule, I whispered. God, she would go all out. Drove Dad mad most years, but he loved it. He'd just never say it aloud. Easily enough, I pictured what my home looked like around this time of year. The wreaths that decorated every door and window, the mistletoe that would hang over every threshold. We had at least 5 trees throughout the house, all decorated in green and red and silver. There'd always be so many candles burning, too. Everything smelled of cinnamon, I said softly with a smile. Cinnamon and pine. Mom hated baking any other time of the year, but as soon as December hit, you couldn't get her out of the kitchen. Though she never did well with pies. We ate them, though. Usually drew straws to see who had to finish them off.
It sounds amazing, Nyala said. I wish I could have met your parents.
They would have loved you. I wish you could see the old house decorated like it used to be. Sadness weighed me down, and I leaned on the railing, hanging my head. There hasn't been a Yule celebration there in so many years now.
We could have gone there if you wanted, instead of being here.
I shook my head. No, this is better. Trust me. I haven't been back to the house since they were killed. I took what I needed and I magically sealed it. Every window and door, every possible way inside. I twisted my hands around the metal railing, picturing how dark and depressing the inside must be. I don't think I'll ever be able to walk through those doors again.
Maybe not alone,
she said, and slipped around, standing between the railing and me.
But you won't be alone. It's your home, Jack. It belongs to you. Don't let them take that away from you, too.
She stood on her toes, held my face, and lightly brushed her lips to mine.
Whenever you decide to go, I'll be right by your side. Promise.
I hugged her, burying my face in the crook of her neck. I know you didn't throw this party just for me, but thank you. She squeezed me back while the snow fell on our shoulders and decorated our hair. We stayed outside in the calming silence until Briar started hollering for us to get back inside for another round of charades. Nyala started to go, but I snagged her hand and pulled her back for one more searing kiss to get me through. She sighed against my lips, and I fisted my hands in her thick red sweater. I forgot where we were while I held her in my arms. Or I did until the door opened and a round of catcalls resounded behind us. Cackling, Nyala broke the kiss, and using her magic, chucked a massive snowball at the Pierce brothers and Hunter. We traipsed back inside, and I let myself believe that maybe this could be my future, that these people could be my new family, that maybe there was a reason to keep hoping after all. The door to my apartment opened, and I hurried up in the bathroom. Tugging my t-shirt over my head, I stepped out into the hall. Nyala?
Yeah, it's me,
she said, but her voice sounded off. When I reached the end of the hall, Nyala was standing at the kitchen island. Frost had spread out to cover the counter from where her hands rested. My heart sank that the last few good days we'd had since returning to Academy were about to come to an end. We'd made it back in time for the New Year's Eve ball. Nyala's dress of deep emerald had fit her like a glove. God, she'd been a sight that night. She was always a sight, honestly, but she'd stolen that ball. Then classes had started, and though I'd been busy playing catch-up, we'd spent every available second in each other's company. For those days, I'd been able to pretend I wasn't cursed and dying. What's wrong? I asked, making my way to Nyala.
Huh? Oh, nothing. I was just thinking about what we were going to do this weekend.
Nyala.
What?
I nodded to the frost now spreading throughout the kitchen. Try again. She curled her hands into tight fists, and the frost pulled back.
I don't want to give you a reason to have a bad day.
Did you hear from Zach's brothers?
Nothing about the dagger.
She worried her bottom lip and hung her head.
It's about Chance.
What about him?
He was spotted at another market without Gabriel.
She started to speak, stopped, then grimaced.
I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to promise me you won't cause an inferno in the apartment.
When have I ever done that?
Jack?
Fine, promise. What do you want to ask?
Is it possible that Chance isn't working with Gabriel willingly? That he's as trapped as you are?
Blood that usually ran hot in my veins turned frigid. You think he's a victim? Is that it?
I saw the pictures. He looks like he's a walking corpse.
And? Let him waste away. Why the fuck should I care? I stormed for the hall, hoping Nyala would stay in the kitchen. She rushed up behind me and caught my arm.
Because he's still your brother,
she argued, turning me around.
You said it yourself. You hadn't seen him in weeks, and that life was taking a toll on him. And he wasn't at the house the night your parents died. He didn't place that coin in your hand.
No, but he gave Gabriel everything he needed to find us. No one else had that information except Chance, I yelled, while fire swirled around my hands.
Are you sure Gabriel didn't torture it out of him somehow?
If that was the case, Chance wouldn't have given us up. He wanted to turn. He wanted to side with Gabriel. Nothing you say is ever going to change what my brother did. Our parents' blood is on his hands. This curse that's killing me is on him too. And once we find that damn dagger and it's lifted, I stopped myself before I gave away too much. I turned back toward the bedroom. When the time comes, I'll be the one to deal with Chance. Alone.
What does that mean?
She demanded.
Jack?
Not trusting myself to speak, I hurried down the hall and shut myself in the bedroom. I waited for her to come knock on the door. She never did. I stalked around the bedroom, kicking the bed and cursing out Chance. He made his bed. He was going to have to lie in it. After a while, I slipped out of the bedroom. The apartment was empty, but Nyala had left a note for me on the kitchen island. All it said was she hoped to see me later at dinner in the hall. I didn't deserve that woman. Not even close. A tickle started in the back of my throat. I coughed, working to clear it. The pain that had been absent from my chest returned with a vengeance. I covered my mouth, tasting blood on my tongue. At least Nyala wasn't here to see the fit. So much for these potions working better. I made it to the bathroom, hacking up more blood. When the fit ended, I washed out my mouth and quickly wiped off my face. Red speckles dotted my gray shirt. I took it off and tucked it at the bottom of my hamper before putting on a fresh one. No need for Nyala to know the potions weren't working anymore. At least not today.
Chapter 11. Nyala. The coffee tasted bitter and sat heavy in my stomach. I'd been up most of the night watching over Jack. The latest batch of potions was failing, just as the first ones had. Jack had tried to hide it from me, but I'd found the bloody t-shirts. And just the other morning, he'd been arguing with Chance, or rather the hallucination of his brother. He swore up and down the potions were working enough that I shouldn't worry. But he was in pain, though he lied to my face over and over, saying he wasn't. The hallucinations weren't as frequent, but they were still just as horrible. I knew because he'd had one in the middle of the night. He'd woken up from a dream and started shouting at Gabriel to let me go. It had taken way too long to break him out of it. When I had, he'd shaken so violently, I was worried he was going to hurt himself. I'd eventually managed to get him to lie back down. He'd held me as close as he could and hadn't passed out until the sun was peeking in through the curtains of his bedroom. And if that hadn't been enough to keep me up all night, what he'd said a couple of days ago was, or what he'd refused to say, I suppose. After Zach had shown me the latest picture of Chance and how terrible he'd looked in them, I hadn't been able to stop myself from asking Jack if his brother could also be a victim. The argument that had followed wasn't one I'd be forgetting any time soon, nor was the silence that had fallen after. The look he'd given me after telling me his brother was his to deal with was one I'd seen before in Zach's eyes after learning what Mark and the other masters had done to Briar. It was a look that promised death. A look that was nothing but the need for revenge, bloody, violent revenge. Was I going to save Jack from the curse, only to turn around and lose him to the hunt for his brother? Would he really go so far as to kill him? What if Chance was innocent and in need of saving himself? If Jack killed him and then found that out, he'd never forgive himself. "Hey," a voice said behind me, and I jumped. "Shit, sorry." Briar sat down at the table beside me. Zach was with her and joined us. The noise from the hall hit me. How had I managed to tune it out? How long had I even been sitting here? I'd come down not long after the sun had risen. Sleeping had been pointless, and I hadn't wanted to disturb Jack. He needed all the rest he could get right now.
"Nyala, you okay?"
I glanced up at Zach. "Yeah, I'm great. Why are you two here? Did something happen?"
"We might have news,"
Zach said slowly.
"I'm not sure now's the best time to share it, though. Have you gotten any sleep this past week?"
"Does it matter? Those potions are already starting to wear off. though he keeps lying to my face, saying he's fine. Then there's his damn plan to go off and hunt down Chance and kill him."
"What?"
Briar snapped.
"What are you talking about?"
I checked out the entrance to the hall, but Jack wasn't standing there. He was hopefully still passed out in his room. I dragged my hands through my hair, cursing at the tangled mess it was this morning. I shook out the messy braid I'd put in this morning and tried to get a hold of myself before frost covered the entire hall. Quickly I told them about our brief argument and what he'd said about his brother. "He's not just looking for his brother for the sake of turning him over to the authorities."
"He's going to kill him,"
Zach supplied for me.
"His rage is understandable."
"You think?" I bit back the rest of what I'd been about to say and muttered an apology to Zach. He waved me off, not seeming bothered at all by my temper this morning. Neither of them was. They were really some of the greatest friends a girl could ask for. "I can't let him turn into a freaking killer if we manage to break the curse. And has anyone else thought that maybe Chance isn't a bad guy?"
"The thought crossed my mind," Briar said, "but we won't get any answers unless we find him."
"And it's when,"
Zach corrected.
"When we break the curse, Nyala."
I straightened in my chair. "You found the dagger?" He hesitated, but Briar gave him a nod.
"She needs to know. They both do. We deal with the curse first, then we handle how to stop Jack from going after his brother alone and doing something he can't take back."
The three of us left the table and headed toward the apartments on the upper floors. A weird fluttering started in my stomach the closer we came to Jack's room. When it became painful, I took off at a run. Something was wrong. I slammed into the door, throwing it open and yelling for Jack at the same time. A groan came from down the hall, followed by the familiar sounds of Jack struggling to breathe. He was hunched over the sink in the bathroom, gripping the edge of the counter for dear life. Blood stained the porcelain and dripped down his lips and chin. Pulling Frost to my hands, I eased them under his shirt and pressed them to his chest. He leaned into me, whispering under his breath. I caught my name, but that was all. He spat out another glob of blood, then staggered back into the wall. Zach helped me get Jack across the hall to his bedroom. The entire time I ensured my hands remained on his bare skin. I placed one on his forehead, and he sighed, sinking into the pillows.
"Thank you,"
he whispered. "I'm sorry I wasn't here."
"No,"
he uttered, and his eyes flew open.
"You can't be around me 24/7, and I don't expect you to."
He frowned, gently cupping my cheek. Fire flickered across his fingertips, then wound around me in a tender embrace.
"I'm the one who's sorry."
"For what?"
"Look at what I'm doing to you."
His thumb caressed the soft skin under my eye.
"You're not sleeping at all. I know you're not eating either."
"I'll be fine."
"Nyala."
"If you're about to try and get me to leave you again, you can just shut up and save your energy. I'm not going anywhere." He pushed himself up into a seating position, leaned in, and lightly brushed his lips over mine. I melted into that simple touch, willing him to hang on just a little longer. A creaking of the floorboards reminded me we weren't alone. I sat back, and Jack wiped the tear that had fallen from my eye. Flames burned in his, weaker than they were before, but still there. I sensed his anger rising, but there was no time for him to get upset over my lack of sleep. "Zach and Briar came with news," I told him. Jack's eyes flickered to the doorway. He must have forgotten they were there.
"About?" "The dagger of vitality. We found it,"
Zach told him. Jack's lips twitched, then broke into a grin while he fell back on the bed and dropped a hand over his face. It only lasted for a second. Then he shot upright again.
"Where is it? How fast can we get it?" "It's currently being held at the main military compound HQ in the office of General Elena Erickson,"
Zach said. Jack's heat that had been pressing against me vanished. His glare became fixed on the far wall. He almost looked as if he was going to be sick. "Jack, what's wrong?"
"Where did you get your information from?"
Jack asked, continuing to glare at the wall.
"That's the part we're unsure of,"
Zach said.
"Adam received a call from an unknown source. All the man said was he heard we were searching for the dagger and he knew where it was. Best of luck getting to it, and if we were smart, we wouldn't let General Erickson know we were the ones who took it if we managed to get onto the compound at all."
"You don't know who called?" I asked.
My brothers traced the number, but they were blocked by some heavy-duty magic.
Zack shook his head, clearly aggravated.
My brothers are good at breaking that shit, but this was on a whole new level. It was shit they'd never seen before. We have no idea who gave us the intel.
But, Briar added, Adam put in some inquiries as to what security measures the compound had, since the Talons recently came into possession of several artifacts from the Morris estate. The commander we spoke to mentioned several items currently being stored there by name. The dagger is confirmed to be there. I glanced from Briar to Zack, noticing the tense set to both their bodies. You think it's a trap of some kind, don't you?
We're not sure what to think,
Zack said.
However, my brothers are already working on a plan to get in, secure the item, and get out, without anyone being the wiser. It's merely going to take time.
And this General Erickson, you think she's, not willing to help us? I asked, confused why the mysterious caller had warned us to stay away from her.
Let's just say she's on my brother's list of those we don't entirely trust,
Zack said. Jack's heat suddenly flared until the room was like an oven. He eased himself off the bed and, on unsteady feet, headed for the door. I reached out a hand to help him, but he simply took it, placed a kiss in the center of my palm, and said he could get himself to the bathroom. He just wanted to freshen up. The bathroom door shut a second later, and the shower turned on.
What's going on with him?
Briar asked. I knew there was something else he hadn't told us, I murmured. That there was someone else involved beyond this Gabriel shithead. Briar laughed quietly, and I shot her a look. What?
What? A year ago you wouldn't be calling people shitheads.
Yeah, well, people change.
That they do.
She came to me and squeezed my upper arms.
We're gonna find a way to get that dagger and break the curse. We will.
And what about this General Erickson? Did her name come up anywhere when your brothers were looking into Jack? I hadn't recalled seeing it in the file on Jack and his family, but there'd been a lot of information dumped on me that night. I could have easily overlooked it.
I'll see what I can find out,
Zack assured me.
Once we have a plan in place, I'll call you. Should only be a few days.
Thank you for doing this, I told him. You and your brothers.
You don't have to thank us,
Zack said and hugged me.
We remember everything you did for us. Everything, Nyala. We're not going to let you lose Jack.
Briar hugged me next.
Zack's going to head back to the Talons HQ to work with his brothers. I'm going to hang around in Silent Heights if you don't mind me using the apartment.
Nope, all yours.
Good. Want me to hang around here a bit longer?
No, I told Briar. We'll be all right.
Maybe take a nap, she told me. Text me later?
I promised I would and saw them both out of Jack's apartment. Once they were gone, I went to the kitchen to see what was in the fridge. There was enough in there to at least make some omelets for a late breakfast. I had classes today, but I wasn't sure I had the strength right then to sit through 2 lectures, then make it through a practical lesson. I worked on making food and brewing a pot of coffee. Once the omelets were finished, I plated them up and sat at the kitchen island to eat. My mind raced from one problem to the next. We found the dagger, but would the Pierce brothers really be able to get their hands on it without alerting this General Erickson? Would it really break the curse once we did have it? And after the curse was broken, was Jack going to up and leave to go track down his brother? Around and around my thoughts went, chasing and bashing into each other. My temples throbbed, and I wound up laying my head on the counter to try and ease the ache. When I opened my eyes again, I wasn't sitting in the kitchen. Jack?
Good, you are alive,
he said with a gentle laugh. He was lying beside me on his bed, his arms wound about me along with a ribbon of fire. He drew me in closer to his chest and kissed the top of my head.
I was wondering if you were ever going to wake up.
I fell asleep.
Passed out at the island.
I rolled over, staying in his arms, and glanced at the sky beyond the windows. The night sky. Well, I guess that answers that question.
Which one?
Whether I was going to make it to my classes today? He tucked my hair behind my ear and pressed his lips to my forehead. I sensed the guilt building in him and heard the intake of breath, as he was most likely about to apologize. Again. I shifted up the bed and kissed him before he could get the words out. His fire brightened, and my frost quickly covered my hands and spread to his body. I soaked in the moment, enjoying being close to him like this. His hands eased up my back under my shirt, pressing flat to bare skin. Our legs tangled, and he rolled us over, his body lying protectively over mine. I wasn't sure how long we stayed like that, kissing and touching and laughing. It felt like forever since we'd let ourselves forget about the curse and what happened to Jack's family. He kissed his way down my neck, then sighed, resting his chin on my stomach while he looked up at me. I should have kept my mouth shut, but I hated that, once again, he was keeping secrets from me.
"What's wrong?" he asked.
"When Zach was talking to us earlier, he mentioned that Erickson woman, and you got pissed. Why? Do you know her? Steal from her in the past?" Jack moved back, shifting to sit on the edge of the bed.
"It's nothing you need to worry about."
"Just like I don't need to worry about your brother?" I asked, and he tensed. "You're not the one going after the dagger."
"I should be the one going,"
he argued. "But you're not. Zach and his brothers are going to handle it." I moved, sitting at his back with my arms wrapped around his waist. "You have help now, remember? You're not in this alone. I need you to get that through your damn thick skull." He rested his hands over mine and sighed.
"I'm trying, all right. I am. But if anything happens to them..."
"It won't, trust me. The Pierce brothers can handle themselves." I kissed his shoulder, then the back of his neck, trying to ease the strain in his body. "You're sure there's nothing you need to tell me about this general?"
"No,"
he said, but his tone was slightly higher than normal.
"She's no one."
I wanted to push him for the truth, but he turned around and we were lying back on the bed a second later. His kisses distracted me, and soon our shirts hit the floor. Jack held me through the night, his fire playing with my frost. When I was on the edge of sleep a while later, I heard him whisper that everything was going to be fine. He pressed his lips to my temple and hugged me as if he feared I was going to disappear from him during the night. Whatever secrets he was holding on to, I prayed they weren't going to get him killed before I had a chance to save him from himself.
Chapter 12. Jack. I stood in the doorway to Nyala's bedroom. Her bed was scattered with books and papers. She spent the weekend working to catch up on the classes she'd missed this past week. Missed because she'd been too busy taking care of me. The woman herself lay amid the mess, a pen still clutched in her hand while she slept. I'd gone to fetch some food from the hall to make sure she'd at least get something to eat. By the time I'd come back to her apartment, she was passed out. I didn't have the heart to wake her up. It had been a few days since Zach and Briar had delivered the news about finding the dagger's location. And since then, I hadn't been able to stop thinking about how soon that blade was going to be in my hands if the Pierce brothers succeeded. What if they didn't? What if Erickson caught wind of their plans? I was not going to be the reason Briar lost Zach or he lost his brothers. Enough families had been torn apart by that bitch. I wouldn't sit by while she destroyed another one. There'd been no word yet from Zach about a plan, which meant they were most likely having trouble figuring out a way to get in and get out without being spotted. I'd offered to help, but Nyala had told me my job was to watch after myself. The others could handle getting the dagger. Unless it turns out to be a trap, I whispered. That was the other worry that had been floating around my mind. Whoever had called with the information had wanted us to know where the dagger was. I knew several people with the skills needed to magically block tracing a call. One of them was Gregory, my black market contact. Chance was another, as was Gabriel. I knew the location of the military compound mostly through my parents. They'd done what they could over the years to keep an eye on General Erickson and what she was buying and trading on the black market. I'd even been there several times myself. Getting in wouldn't be a problem, not for a Scot, at least. I'd been weighing my decision all damn day, knowing once I made up my mind to go, Nyala would be pissed.
"Jack,"
Nyala whispered in her sleep. Her face scrunched as it did when she was having a nightmare. She curled in on herself, and I hurried around the bed. I sat down beside her and lightly kissed her lips. She settled, and as gently as possible, I picked her up and positioned her with her head on the pillows. Once she was tucked in, I gathered up the books and papers and set them on the nightstand, and lingered by her side for another minute. I forced myself to back away and silently pulled the bedroom door closed behind me. Quickly, I made it to my apartment at the other end of the hall and gathered what I needed. With my small duffel hanging off my shoulder, I went to the kitchen and eyed the potions the Pierce brothers had brought me. I had 2 left. Figuring it wouldn't hurt, I downed them both, then hurried out the door. Getting a car wasn't any trouble, and soon Academy was in the rear view. It took a few hours to get to the military compound. Not that I'd be able to drive right up to the front gates. I'd have to leave the car and head in on foot. The base itself was in the mountains and surrounded by dense forest to keep humans from stumbling across it by accident. One road led to it and was only visible to summoners. About 2 miles outside the compound, while I wound up a twisting road, higher and higher, the car ran into an invisible wall. What the hell? Silvery spiderwebs of spirit energy held the vehicle in place. A knock came on the driver's side window. I flinched, glowering at the 3 figures standing there, waiting for me to lower the window. I reached for the button, and Zach, Luke, and Nick's irritated frowns were there to greet me. "How did you find me?" I demanded. "We're not idiots," Luke said with a laugh. "We put a tracker on you back at the Morris estate." "What? No, I would have felt it." "What we do for a reason," Nick chimed in. "We're damn good at our jobs. We should be asking you what the hell you think you're doing. We told you we had it handled, and yet here you are." "I have my reasons." "Great," Zach snapped. "Can't wait to hear them. There's a gravel road a 1/4 mile up ahead. Pull off onto it and we can talk." He waved his hand, and the trap he'd created over the road vanished. The brothers walked off into the darkness. I considered speeding around them, but between the 3 of them, I wouldn't get very far. I did as they said and parked behind a black SUV that was already tucked into the small turnaround. I climbed out of the car and came face to face with the same piercing stare from 3 sets of eyes. "Whatever you've been holding back, tell us. Now," Luke said. "You won't believe me. No one would. It's why it was left out of the report. I wasn't sure who I could trust," I explained. "Do you trust us?" Zach asked. On reflex, I nearly said no, but the longer I stood there with the Pierce brothers, the more it hit me that I had come to trust them, no matter what I told myself. Why else had I come here tonight to stop them from potentially walking into a trap laid for me? "The night my parents were killed," I told them quietly, "there was another person there. She's the one who ordered the hit." "General Erickson?" Nick asked. My parents had found out about her illegal selling and trading of artifacts years before, but she was too heavily guarded and seen as a hero for past deeds, I spat. The few times my parents had brought her up, word always made it back to her, and the investigations disappeared. We were close, so damn close to tying her to Gabriel. That was when she came after us first. So yeah, I was worried that I was sending you all into a trap. She wants me dead, and if she finds out it's you 3 who helped me get the dagger, she'll come after you next. Nick and Luke exchanged a furious glance. "Your parents weren't the only ones with their eyes on her," Luke told me. "Our father had a secret file on her. He kept it to himself. We found it after his death. Unfortunately, she hides her tracks damned well. Her network is massive," Nick added. "She doesn't make it easy." "And Adam has turned down our alternative to her being arrested," Luke muttered. "What's that?" I asked. Luke shrugged. "An accident." I wasn't sure what he meant. Then it hit me. "You'd go that far?" "I guarantee you don't know half of what that woman's done," Nick said. "Your parents aren't the only ones to meet a bloody end because of her." "Which is why I have to do this alone," I insisted, and the brothers laughed. "No, you don't. We had plans to come and fetch the dagger 2 nights from now, but we're already here," Zach said. "Might as well get it." "Is Bri up for it?" Luke asked. "Oh, she's good to go. She's way too damned excited about it, too. The first time we're testing this long range." "Wait, she's here too?" I glanced around, but there was no sign of Briar. Zach tapped his forehead. "She's got eyes on us, and she says you were an idiot, by the way. Are we ready to move?" "You have a plan to get in and out with a dagger without being spotted?" "You're not the only thief here," Luke said, clapping me on the shoulder. He opened the back of the SUV, pulled out a small tactical-style bag, and slung it onto his back. He nodded toward the trees and set off through the brush, hardly making a sound. I took off after him, with Nick and Zach bringing up the rear behind me. About a mile ahead, a tall stone wall appeared through the trees. Atop it were spotlights and several guards on patrol. My parents had drawn up plans for this compound in their pursuit of Erickson. I'd memorized the layout and knew there was an access door to the south. It'd take us to the underground level of the base. There were fewer guards, but it was a maze through stairways and corridors to reach Erickson's office. Without me mentioning the door, Luke led the way straight to it. I must have had a surprised look on my face. He beamed and whispered, "You're not the only one good at breaking and entering." The door was heavily warded with layers of magical locks. If I'd been alone, it would have taken me a solid hour to undo them. The two Pierce brothers were through them in less than 5 minutes. I really had to stop doubting their skills. The door eased open and we slipped inside. Nick removed a map from the bag, checked it over, then tucked it away. He motioned us forward down a long, winding tunnel. The floor beneath us was concrete, but the walls were metal lined with groaning metal pipes. Naked bulbs hung from the ceiling every couple of yards. Each time we reached an intersection, I waited for a guard to meet us. A few times voices drifted closer to us, then would suddenly change direction. We couldn't be this lucky, could we? I lost track of the turns Nick made, until finally we reached a set of stairs. At the top stood 4 guards, their backs to us. There was no way to slip past them. Zach tilted his head, and a faint, shimmery figure emerged from his body. At the sight of Briar astral projecting, I understood what she'd been doing for us. She sent me an annoyed look, then glided up the stairs. She spread her arms, and silver tendrils of light seeped from her hands. They touched each guard's temple in turn. One by one, they moved away from the top of the stairs. Briar's form hovered near the top, then waved us up to join her. "Not sure how much longer I can do this," she told Zach. "You guys might be on your own soon." "Don't push yourself," Zach ordered. "When have I ever done that?" she asked with a wink, and Zach rolled his eyes. "By the way," she said, turning to me, "you're in deep shit." She blinked out of sight, and I cursed. "Worry about Nyala kicking your ass once we're out of here," Zach told me. "How much further?" he asked Nick. 2 floors up and 5 wings over. If Bry can't clear the way for us, we'll have to fall to Plan B," he said. "Do I want to know what Plan B is?" I asked. Luke chuckled. "Probably not. Let's move." Briar stepped in to help us 3 more times, but otherwise, we managed to avoid any roaming patrols or other soldiers and commanders. By the time we reached Erickson's office, though, Zach had lost communication with Briar. It was on the 4 of us now. Erickson's office was at the end of the corridor. A set of double metal doors blocked our path. There was no guard on it, but as we approached, I realized why she didn't need one. I grabbed Nick's arm, stopping him. "Wait. There's warding 5 feet out from the door," I told him. "You can see that? You're not the only one who's good at this job. Are we sure she's not in there?" "We made sure," Luke explained. "We have someone keeping her occupied elsewhere. He'll give us a warning if she's headed back this way. So far, we're good. Can you get through the warding without setting it off?" Pulling on the spells my mother had taught me, I summoned an array of small, fiery birds. They fluttered around me and then soared down the hall. Just like when I'd broken into the Morris estate, my fires sought out a weak spot. There was always one. Little by little, I picked the warding apart. It gave way, and I cleared our path to the doors. There was another layer on them. I didn't waste a second and got to work on that one, too. "Jack?" Zach asked beside me. My arms were trembling, and sweat had broken out on my forehead from the strain. A sharp stabbing had started in my lungs, too, but I couldn't stop. We were so close. The lines of the warding burned bright on the metal for a split second, then faded. The doors opened, beckoning us inside. I sagged against the wall, and Zach gripped my arm, keeping me upright. Nick and Luke stepped inside the office first, then poked their heads out, saying it was clear. Zach and I followed them inside. The whole time, a voice in the back of my head said this was way too damn easy.
But then I spotted the wall of artifacts displayed behind the massive black stone desk. All my worries vanished. There, sitting on a shelf near the bottom right, was a long rectangular wooden box. The lid was propped open to show its contents. Inside was a silver dagger. Its hilt was covered in sapphires and pearls. The etching on the blade spoke of giving life to the one who held it. "Is that it?" Zack asked. "Jack?" Swallowing hard and not entirely believing what I was staring at, I nodded. "That's it." Nick reached for the box while Luke pulled out his phone. "Let's go. We're out of time." Zack was already pulling me out of the office, his brothers rushing out after us. They shut the door as if they'd never been opened, but the warding was gone. Erickson would know someone had been in her office, or I thought she would, until Luke spun around and set a small circular device on the floor. He tapped it, and the warding I'd broken apart reappeared, good as new. How? "Neat little toy we cooked up. Takes a copy of the magic and saves it for 10 minutes, he explained, picked the coin up and shoved it in his pocket. "I can show you more fun things if you just decide to join the Talons. We could use someone with your caliber of skills." "Maybe I will," I heard myself say. My parents had tried for years to stay out of the military, and look what happened to them. If they'd given in and worked with the Talons, would they still be alive? It was something to ponder over later, once we made it back to Silent Heights. And when the curse was no longer threatening to kill me. Nick had been nearing the end of the corridor, then stopped and waved us back. Luke threw open the door to a small room off the main hall. It looked like another office, but there was no warding, and hardly anything inside except a desk and a chair. We filed into the dark space. Luke had just shut the door, and 2 voices moved past. One of them was a man I didn't recognize, but the other one? That one I'd never forget. Overwhelmed by a swell of rage, I lunged forward. Zack snagged my arms and yanked me back. His eyes narrowed in warning. Luke placed a hand over my mouth, cutting off my muttered curses. I fought against them for another second before giving up. Erickson's voice trailed off. Not long after, the sound of her office door opening and closing reached us. Nick peered out the door, gave the nod for the all clear, and Zack dragged me out of the office. He didn't let up his grip on my arm until we were safely outside the base. "I'm sorry," I told them all. "It's fine, we get it," Zack said, not seeming pissed at all he'd had to restrain me. "We got the dagger, that's what matters. Should we just use it now?" "No," I said. "Using it will give off a magical surge. Everyone within a few miles will feel it." "Then let's get our asses back to Silent Heights and lift this curse." Zack smiled at me. I grinned back and whispered, "We have the dagger." "We have the dagger," Zack repeated, "one step closer." As silently as we'd arrived, the 4 of us darted into the woods surrounding the base in the mountains and returned to our cars. Nyala would be pissed, but with any luck, the knowledge that I could lift the curse and end this part of the nightmare might be enough to stop her from freezing me into a block of ice. I couldn't stop smiling. The pain that had started in my chest was nothing but an annoyance now. I had the dagger. The curse was going to be broken. I wasn't going to die.
Chapter 13. Nyala. Briar gave up trying to calm me down after we reached the apartment in Silent Heights. I'd been freaking out since she'd shown up at Academy, telling me that Zack and his brothers were with Jack, and that Jack had taken off after the dagger alone. We'd driven straight to Silent Heights, where they were to meet up with us after. The entire time Briar had helped to get them through the base, I'd paced, unable to sit still while I waited for her to tell me that something had gone terribly wrong. Then she'd lost contact. The second she'd received a text from Zack saying they were on their way, my worry had been replaced by anger. "I'm gonna murder him," I snapped, glaring at the front door while I paced again from one end of the living room to the other. "I'm gonna kill him myself and be done with it."
"That sounds a bit harsh."
"Second time," I yelled. "This is the second time he's pulled this shit. What does he expect me to do, huh? Not lose my mind?" Briar started to speak, but a knock at the door cut her off. She rushed to open it for me and stepped aside. Zack led the way in, followed by Luke and Nick. And right behind them, rubbing the back of his neck and looking like he already knew how much shit he was in, was Jack. I crossed my arms, scowling.
"Well?" I snapped. "Was it worth it?"
"Nyala,
"Did you get it or not?"
Jack sighed, then held up a small black duffel that was clutched in his right hand.
"We did."
"Good."
I marched over to him and shoved him hard.
"What the hell were you thinking, you moron?"
"I was thinking of trying to keep you and everyone else safe,"
he yelled back.
"From what? They said they had it handled."
"Not with that bitch involved, they wouldn't have. Trust me."
"Who are you talking about?"
"General Elena Erickson."
Zach chimed in helpfully.
"Apparently there's a bit more to Jack's story than he told us. She's involved, and not in a good way."
I gritted my teeth, debating on freezing Jack in a block of ice or shoving him again. Then I really looked at him. He looked far worse than when I'd fallen asleep earlier tonight.
"Well, what are you waiting for? You got the dagger, right? Use the damn thing."
Jack muttered under his breath, slipped his arm around my waist, and hauled me into his chest. The kiss was heated, but quick. Then he was moving toward the living room. Gently, he set the duffel on the table while the rest of us gathered around. I wanted to hear every detail of how they got the blade out of the base without causing any trouble, but that could come after Jack used the dagger and lifted the curse. Palms sweaty, I bounced on the balls of my feet, impatient for him to reveal the dagger of vitality. From the duffel, he pulled a slim cherrywood box. There were no markings on the outside to designate what was inside. A weird humming filled the apartment, though. Something magical was in that box. Letting out a shaky breath, Jack sat on the edge of the couch and pulled the box toward him. He lifted the lid. There, nestled on a bed of black velvet, was a shining silver dagger. The hilt was covered in bright blue sapphires, intermixed with pearls. An inscription was etched into the blade. The language wasn't one I recognized.
"What do you need to do?"
Zach whispered.
"Hold it in the hand that was cursed and place the tip over the center of my chest,"
Jack explained. His eyes flicked to me, and he winked.
"Here goes nothing."
I held my breath. Jack reached for the dagger with both hands. Gently, he lifted it out of the box by the hilt and the very tip of the blade. He turned it around, ready to place it to his chest. The stones on the hilt pulsed. Jack frowned. I was going to ask him what was wrong. Then a high-pitched screech flooded the apartment. I slapped my hands to my ears, wincing along with everyone else. The dagger became engulfed in a bright blue light. When it faded, the blade and hilt crumbled into dust, falling to the floor at Jack's feet. End of Book 7. This has been Fallacy, Next Generation, Academy of Ancients, Book 7, written by Avery Cross, narrated by Jack Ainsworth. Copyright 2023 by Avery Cross. Production copyright by Avery Cross.